We're told that our bodies are temples, sacred vessels we decorate to tell our stories, that ink on skin is power, identity, rebellion wrapped in art. We're told that the marks we choose define us, that we control our own narratives written in permanent color beneath the surface. But when you wake up one morning with a mark you didn't choose, branded like cattle while you slept, you learn the devastating truth. Your body was never yours to begin with. And the cruelest joke? Everyone can see exactly what was done to you, except you can't see it yourself. The mirror doesn't lie, but it doesn't tell the whole truth either. It shows you your face, your eyes still puffy from another night of tears you refuse to acknowledge. It shows you the oversized sweater you've worn for 3 days straight, because the laundry requires leaving your apartment, and leaving your apartment requires facing them. It shows you everything except the thing that matters, the mark that sits between your shoulder blades, the one everyone else sees before they see your face, before they learn your name, before they decide you're worth their time. Isla hadn't asked for the tattoo. She hadn't stumbled drunk into a parlor at 3 a.m, hadn't made some impulsive decision she'd later regret. She'd simply woken up on her 21st birthday, that supposed threshold into adulthood, into power, into finally becoming someone who mattered and felt the burning. Not pain. Exactly. More like awareness. Like her body was screaming at her to pay attention to something that had fundamentally changed while she was unconscious and vulnerable. Her roommate, Tessa, had gasped. Actually gasped, hand flying to her mouth like she'd witnessed a murder. "Oh, Isla. Oh no. I'm so sorry. Sorry." The word had felt like a slap. Sorry meant something terrible had happened. Sorry meant there was something to mourn. What? What is it? Isla had spun, trying to see her own back, but the human body isn't designed for that kind of contortion. She'd grabbed her phone, held it over her shoulder, angled it just right, and finally saw what made Tessa's face crumple with pity. A mark. Intricate, undeniable, permanent, but not the mark everyone hoped for. Not the elaborate pack sigils that appeared on shifters when they came of age. Those bold, beautiful designs that announced you belonged somewhere, that you were strong, that you mattered. Not the delicate, minimalist marks that appeared on humans chosen as mates, those elegant patterns that whispered of destiny and desire. No, Isla's mark was different. It was a ring. A simple, unbroken circle, maybe 3 inches in diameter, positioned perfectly between her shoulder blades, where everyone could see it but she couldn't. Inside the ring, instead of the complex patterns of pack hierarchy or the romantic swirls of mate bonds, there was only one symbol, a horizontal line, perfectly straight, perfectly damning. Null. 0. Nothing. In a world where everyone received their mark, their purpose, their place, their proof, they mattered. Isla had been branded with the visual representation of worthlessness, the mark that said, "You are not pack, you are not mate, you are not even human enough to be left unmarked. You are the exception we don't talk about. You are the statistical anomaly. You are the mistake. Maybe it's just late?" Tessa had offered, her voice thin with false hope. "Maybe the real mark will come in later?" "I heard about someone once who..." "Don't." Isla had cut her off. She didn't need false hope. She needed a plan. She needed a way to hide this thing, to cover it up, to pretend she was normal for just a little while longer. Just don't. That had been 6 months ago. 6 months of high-necked shirts and strategic layering, of declining invitations to anything involving pools or beaches or trust falls where someone might see. 6 months of watching other people receive their marks, the celebrations, the tears of joy, the immediate shift in how they were treated. 6 months of becoming invisible in a way that felt worse than being ignored, because now people saw her mark first and decided she wasn't worth seeing at all. The coffee shop job had seemed safe, neutral territory. People came in, ordered their drinks, and left. They didn't ask questions. They didn't stare. They didn't whisper. Until the day they did. Isla didn't know how it happened. Maybe the air conditioning had blown her collar aside. Maybe she'd reached for something on a high shelf and her shirt had ridden up. Maybe the universe had simply decided she'd suffered enough in private and needed a public humiliation to round out the experience. She'd been making a latte, nothing complicated, just steamed milk and espresso, the kind of order she could complete while thinking about something else entirely when she heard it. Laughter. Not polite chuckling or friendly conversation. Real laughter, the kind edged with cruelty, the kind that makes your stomach drop even before you know you're the target. Is that real? A woman's voice, loud enough to carry across the entire shop. Isla's hand stilled on the milk pitcher. She didn't turn around. If she didn't turn around, maybe it wasn't happening. Maybe this was some other humiliation, some other victim. Oh my God, it is. It's a null mark. A man this time, his tone mixing disgust and fascination in equal measure. I've never actually seen one in person. The shop had gone quiet. That terrible, anticipatory silence that meant everyone was watching, everyone was waiting to see what would happen next. Isla could feel their eyes on her back, on the mark she couldn't hide anymore, on the proof of her worthlessness made visible. Didn't they used to exile people like that? Another voice, casual as if discussing the weather. Like, back in the old days, send them away so they wouldn't contaminate the bloodlines? Still should, someone else agreed. I mean, what's the point of her? Can't shift, can't bond, can't do anything useful. Just taking up space. Isla's fingers tightened on the milk pitcher. She should turn around. She should defend herself. She should say something cutting and perfect that would make them ashamed of their cruelty. But her throat had closed up, and her eyes were burning, and she couldn't quite remember how to make her body move the way she wanted. Maybe she's cursed. A younger voice, uncertain. Maybe someone did something to her? Don't be stupid. Curses aren't real. She's just defective. The first woman again, confident in her judgment. Probably why her parents gave her up. Who'd want to keep something like that? The words hit like physical blows. Isla hadn't told anyone she was adopted. Hadn't mentioned that she'd grown up in the group home for unwanted children. The ones whose parents had taken one look at their marks or lack thereof, and decided they couldn't bear the shame. How did this stranger know? How could she possibly? Although I guess the tattoo is kind of artistic? Someone tried, weakly. Like, minimalist? Very. Zen? More laughter. Harder this time. Yeah, Zen. That's one way to put it. Another way is genetic dead end. Isla finally managed to turn around. She should have kept facing the espresso machine. Should have pretended she couldn't hear them, couldn't feel the weight of their judgment. But some small, defiant part of her, the part that had survived the group home, survived the pitying looks and whispered conversations, survived 21 years of being nobody's daughter and nobody's future, made her look. 7 people. 7 ordinary people having their ordinary morning coffee, united in their casual cruelty towards someone they'd never met. The woman who'd spoken first was beautiful in that effortless way that meant she'd never had to work for anything, never had to prove her worth. Her mark visible on her forearm, an elegant wolf mid-leap proclaimed her pack affiliation, her status, her right to judge. Isla opened her mouth. She still didn't know what she was going to say. Maybe nothing, maybe everything, maybe just, "Your latte is ready," with enough ice in her voice to make them uncomfortable. But she never got the chance. The door opened, and everything, the laughter, the whispers, the casual cruelty stopped, not gradually, not the way conversations naturally ebb and flow. It stopped like someone had reached into the room and ripped the sound out by force. Stopped so completely that Isla could hear the espresso machine hissing behind her, could hear her own heartbeat thundering in her ears, could hear the absolute absence of breathing from the 7 people who'd been mocking her seconds ago. The temperature dropped, not metaphorically, actually dropped, like someone had opened a window in winter, though the door was already swinging shut behind the person who'd just entered. Isla felt goosebumps rise on her arms, felt her body respond to some primal warning she didn't consciously understand. She turned fully then, forgetting the customers, forgetting her humiliation, forgetting everything except the need to see what had made the entire room freeze. He stood in the doorway, and Isla's first thought was that he was too large for the space. Not grotesquely oversized, not a giant from children's stories, but proportioned in a way that made everything else seem smaller, less significant. 6.5 feet at least, shoulders broad enough to block the sunlight streaming through the door behind him, presence dense enough to make the air feel heavy. His second quality was stillness. He wasn't moving, wasn't looking around the room with interest or curiosity. He was simply there, existing with the kind of absolute confidence that came from never having to prove anything to anyone. His third quality, the one that made Isla's breath catch in a way that had nothing to do with fear, and everything to do with recognition she didn't want to examine, was his eyes, dark enough to be black from a distance, fixed with laser focus on something across the room, on someone, on her. Isla had never believed in the romance stories Tessa loved, the ones where gazes locked across crowded rooms and time stopped and destiny announced itself with trumpets and fireworks. She'd thought that was fantasy, the kind of thing that happened to people with proper marks, people who mattered. But she believed it now, because she couldn't look away, because he wasn't looking away, because the entire coffee shop had faded into background noise, and there was only this moment, this connection, this impossible awareness of another person existing in her space. The beautiful woman with the wolf mark, the one who'd called Isla a genetic dead end, 30 seconds ago made a small, strangled sound. It might have been a word. It might have been a prayer. It might have been the sound of someone realizing they'd made a catastrophic mistake. Because the man in the doorway, the one whose presence had frozen 7 cruel people mid-laugh, had a mark too. Isla could see it now, partially visible above the collar of his black shirt, spreading up his neck in intricate patterns that spoke of power and dominance and authority so absolute it didn't need to be announced. She didn't need to see the full design to know what it meant. Didn't need to recognize the specific pattern. Everyone knew what a mark like that signified. Everyone knew what it meant when someone walked into a room and the air itself bowed in deference. Alpha. Not just any alpha, the kind of alpha that made other alphas nervous. The kind that didn't need to announce their presence because their presence was its own announcement. And he was walking toward her, not toward the beautiful woman who'd frozen in her seat, not toward the man who'd suggested exiling null marks, not toward the exit or the bathroom or the counter to place an order. Toward Isla. Specifically, deliberately, inexorably. The room remained silent. The 7 customers pressed themselves back in their seats as he passed, like trees bending away from a storm. The other barista, Jake, who'd been preparing sandwiches in the back, had emerged, and now stood motionless with a knife in his hand, and an expression of pure terror on his face. The alpha stopped 3 feet from Isla. 3 feet that felt like 3 inches. Felt like no distance at all. Felt like he was already touching her even though his hands remained at his sides. Up close, she could see details her brain hadn't processed from across the room. The sharp line of his jaw, the slight curve of his mouth that wasn't quite a smile, the way his dark hair fell across his forehead, just long enough to be distracting, the expensive cut of his clothes, the kind of tailoring that meant money but also power, the kind of details that separated people who had wealth from people who had influence, but mostly, she could see his eyes, and they were looking at her mark, not her face, not her name tag, not the latte she'd abandoned mid-pour. Her mark, the null circle, the proof of her worthlessness. The thing everyone had been laughing at before he walked in. Isla waited for it. The disgust, the disappointment, the moment when he realized she wasn't worth his attention after all. Maybe he'd just been walking toward the bathroom and she happened to be in the way. Maybe this wasn't about her at all. Maybe, who made you cry? His voice was exactly what she expected, and nothing like she'd imagined. Deep enough to feel in her chest, rough around the edges like whiskey and smoke, but carrying an undertone of something she couldn't identify. Concern? Rage? Both? Isla blinked. Her hand went automatically to her face, and she was mortified to find her cheeks wet. She hadn't realized she was crying, hadn't felt the tears fall, hadn't given herself permission to show weakness in front of the people who'd been mocking her. Her voice came out broken. She cleared her throat, tried again. I'm fine. Can I get you something? Coffee? We have a special on. Who? He didn't raise his voice. Didn't need to. The single word carried enough weight to make the espresso machine's hissing sound loud by comparison. Made you cry. It wasn't a question. It was a demand. And Isla, who'd spent her entire life being ignored and dismissed and talked over, found herself unable to lie to him. Her eyes slid to the side, just for a second, just long enough to glance at the table where the 7 customers sat frozen, their earlier confidence evaporated, their faces pale with dawning horror. The alpha's gaze followed hers, landed on the beautiful woman with the wolf mark. studied her for exactly 3 seconds, then returned to Isla. "Tell me what they said." "It doesn't matter." Isla tried to smile. It felt wrong on her face, forced and brittle. "People talk. It's fine. I'm used to it." Something dangerous flickered across his expression. "You shouldn't have to be used to it." "Well," Isla shrugged, aiming for casual and landing somewhere near defeated. "That's life when you're marked null. Or unmarked. Or however you want to describe being nobody's anything." She didn't know why she was talking to him like this. Didn't know why she was being honest instead of professional, vulnerable instead of polite. Maybe because he'd asked. Maybe because his eyes hadn't left her face, hadn't dismissed her, hadn't treated her like something to be laughed at. Maybe because for the first time in 6 months, someone was seeing her instead of just seeing her mark. The alpha reached up slowly, telegraphing his movement like he was approaching a frightened animal, and touched her shoulder. Just touched it, his hand warm and solid through her thin work shirt, his thumb brushing against the edge of her collar where the mark must be visible. "You're not nobody's anything." His voice had gone quieter, but not less intense. If anything, the softness made it more powerful, more intimate, more impossible to ignore. "You're—" He stopped. His hand stilled on her shoulder. His entire body went rigid, and for a horrible moment Isla thought he'd seen the mark up close, seen the null circle in all its damning clarity, and realized his mistake. Realized she wasn't worth this attention after all. But when he looked at her again, his expression wasn't disgust. It was shock. Pure, absolute shock that made his eyes widen and his breath catch, and his grip on her shoulder tighten just enough that she could feel the tremor in his fingers. "That's impossible," he whispered. And then the 7 customers who'd been sitting frozen in terror chose that moment to bolt for the door. They moved as one, chairs scraping against tile, bags grabbed without care for what spilled out, cups abandoned mid-sip. The beautiful woman with the wolf mark led the charge, her earlier confidence replaced by naked fear as she practically threw herself toward the exit. They didn't make it. The alpha didn't move, didn't chase them, didn't even turn his head to watch them flee. He simply said, "Stop." One word, spoken at normal volume. Not a shout, not a command layered with alpha power, not a threat. Just, "Stop." And they stopped. All 7 of them. Frozen mid-step, mid-reach, mid-escape. Frozen like someone had hit pause on reality itself. The alpha still hadn't looked away from Isla. His hand still rested on her shoulder. His expression still showed that strange combination of shock and something else. Something that made Isla's stomach flip in a way that had nothing to do with fear. "Stay there," he told the 7 frozen people. Then, to Isla, in that same quiet voice that felt like it was meant only for her, "We need to talk. Somewhere private. Somewhere safe." He paused, and a slight smile curved his mouth, the first real emotion she'd seen from him besides shock and carefully controlled rage. "Somewhere you can tell me everything about this mark. Because I think there's been a rather significant misunderstanding." Isla's heart hammered against her ribs. What kind of misunderstanding? The alpha's thumb traced the edge of her collar again, and this time when he spoke, his voice carried something that sounded almost like awe, the kind where everyone thinks you're worthless, when you're actually the most valuable person in this entire kingdom. Chapter 2. The Transaction. The alpha's private office wasn't what Isla expected. She'd imagined something cold and intimidating: marble floors, imposing furniture, walls lined with the mounted heads of enemies or trophies from conquered territories. The kind of space designed to make visitors feel small and insignificant, to remind them of the vast distance between themselves and the person who commanded from behind a massive desk. Instead, she found herself in a room that felt, almost, lived in. The floor was dark, hardwood, worn smooth in places where feet had traced the same paths for years. Bookshelves lined 2 walls, stuffed with volumes that had clearly been read rather than displayed, spines cracked, pages, dog-eared, some with strips of paper marking specific passages. A fireplace dominated the far wall, unlit but surrounded by 2 leather chairs that had molded to the shape of bodies over time. Papers covered the desk, organized chaos that spoke of someone actually working rather than posing. The only intimidating element was the floor-to-ceiling window behind the desk, offering a view of the entire city spread below like a kingdom on a game board. From this high up, people looked like toys, insignificant, disposable. Isla stood just inside the doorway, her arms wrapped around herself, acutely aware that she was still wearing her coffee-stained apron, and her hair was falling out of its ponytail, and she probably smelled like espresso and anxiety. The Alpha had dismissed her manager with 3 quiet words, "She's with me," and Jake hadn't even argued, just nodded frantically and waved them toward the back exit. The 7 customers were still frozen in the coffee shop. Isla had glanced back as they left and seen them standing like statues, their faces locked in expressions of terror. The Alpha had said something about his beta coming to handle them, which could mean anything from a stern warning to something far worse. Isla hadn't asked for clarification, wasn't sure she wanted to know. Now, alone with him in this space that felt simultaneously public and intimate, Isla couldn't quite figure out what she was supposed to do. Sit? Stand? Run? Apologize for taking up his valuable time? The Alpha moved to the window, his back to her, hands clasped behind him in a posture that looked casual but felt controlled. "Do you know who I am?" Isla's throat felt dry. An Alpha. Obviously. Probably. Important. He made a sound that might have been amusement. Diplomatic answer. He turned, and the afternoon light caught his features in sharp relief. The strong jaw, the dark eyes, the slight scar above his left eyebrow she hadn't noticed before. "My name is Damon Ashford. I'm king of the Northern Territories. Everything you can see from this window, and considerably more beyond it, answers to me. King. Not just an Alpha, not just someone with power. The king, the one whose laws governed 5 territories, whose word could start wars or broker peace, whose mark was so well known that children drew versions of it in school, trying to copy the intricate pattern that signified absolute authority." Isla's knees felt weak. She'd been talking to him like he was just someone, had told him she was used to being mocked, had let him see her cry, had let him touch her shoulder like they were equals, like she had any right to his attention. "I should go." The words came out strangled. "I'm sorry. I didn't know. I shouldn't have. Stop apologizing." Damon's voice cut through her spiral with surgical precision. "And stop looking at me like I'm about to execute you. If I wanted you afraid, you'd know it. Somehow, that didn't help." He sighed and moved to one of the leather chairs by the fireplace, gesturing to the other. "Sit. Please, I'm not going to hurt you, Isla. I'm trying to understand something, and I need your help to do it." He knew her name. She hadn't told him her name. Must have read her name tag, except she couldn't remember if he'd ever looked at it. Couldn't remember anything except his eyes on her face, his hand on her shoulder, his voice saying she was valuable when everyone else had called her worthless. She sat, perched on the edge of the chair like a bird ready to bolt, her hands twisted together in her lap. Damon studied her for a long moment, and Isla had the uncomfortable sensation of being catalogued, her nervous energy, her defensive posture, her worn sneakers and cheap clothes and everything else that screamed she didn't belong in this room with this man. "Tell me about your mark," he said finally. "When did it appear? What were the circumstances?" Isla's hand went automatically to her shoulder, even though she couldn't feel the mark through her shirt and apron. "My 21st birthday. 6 months ago. I woke up and it was just there. And before that, any indication it was coming? Any dreams, visions, physical sensations?" She shook her head. "Nothing. I'd hoped maybe I'd be one of the late bloomers, the ones whose marks show up at 25 or 30, but then it came and it was." She couldn't finish the sentence. Couldn't say what everyone else had already said, that it was nothing. That it meant nothing. That she was nothing. A null circle. Damon's voice was neutral, but his eyes were intense, focused on her face with an attention that made her want to squirm. A ring with a single horizontal line inside, perfectly centered between your shoulder blades. "Yes." The word came out bitter. "The mark that means I don't belong anywhere. Can't shift, can't bond, can't contribute to a pack or a bloodline or anything useful. Just taking up space, like they said. They were wrong. Isla looked up sharply. Damon was leaning forward now, elbows on his knees, his posture intense in a way that made her heart rate spike. "That's not a null mark," he said carefully. "That's an eclipse mark." The words meant nothing to her. "A what?" "An eclipse mark. It's—" He paused, seeming to choose his words with unusual care. "It's extraordinarily rare. There hasn't been one in over 300 years. Most people don't even know they exist anymore. The knowledge has been lost, or deliberately suppressed, or maybe just forgotten because they're so uncommon." Isla's mind was racing, trying to process what he was saying, trying to reconcile his words with everything she'd been told, everything she'd believed about herself for 6 months. What does it mean? An eclipse mark? Damon stood and moved to his desk, pulling out a leather-bound book so old the cover had worn smooth. He flipped through pages with the confidence of someone who'd done this before, who'd studied this, who knew exactly what he was looking for. He turned the book toward her, pointing to an illustration that made her breath catch. It was her mark. Exactly her mark. The circle, the line, the precise placement. But in this drawing, the circle wasn't empty. It was filled with intricate patterns that seemed to shift when she looked at them, like the ink couldn't quite decide what it wanted to be. "An eclipse mark," Damon explained, his voice taking on the tone of someone lecturing, someone who'd spent time researching this. "Appears on someone who exists between states. Not quite human, not quite shifter. Not quite one pack, not quite another. Someone who doesn't fit in the existing categories because they're meant to bridge them." Bridge them how? That's where it gets complicated. Damon closed the book but kept his hand on the cover, as if drawing strength from it. Eclipse marks appear on people who are catalysts, people whose presence changes the fundamental nature of bonds, pacts, territories, people who can see connections others can't, who can form relationships that shouldn't be possible according to every known law of our biology. Isla's head was spinning. "That doesn't make sense. I can't do any of that. I can't even shift. I can't feel pack bonds. I'm just what?" Damon's voice was gentle but firm. "Just worthless? Just nothing? Is that what you were going to say?" She couldn't answer, couldn't admit how deeply she'd internalized those words, how completely she'd believed them. Damon moved closer, crouching in front of her chair so they were at eye level, this close. She could see flecks of gold in his dark eyes, could smell something that reminded her of pine and smoke, and something indefinably wild. "Isla, I need to tell you something. And I need you to hear it, without panicking." He paused, making sure she was listening. "When I touched your shoulder in the coffee shop, when my hand made contact with your mark, I felt something I've never felt before." "Why?" Her heart was hammering now. "What?" "A bond." The word hung between them, impossible and terrifying. Not a mate bond, not a pack bond, not anything that's supposed to exist between an alpha king and a... He stopped himself, but Isla could fill in the blank. Between an alpha king and a nobody, between an alpha king and someone marked null, between an alpha king and someone like her. "That's impossible," Isla whispered, echoing his own words from the coffee shop. "I know." Damon's smile was slight, wry, carrying an edge of something that looked like fear. But it happened anyway. And if the old texts are right about eclipse marks, if they're right about what you are, then this might just be the beginning. The beginning of what? Before Damon could answer, the office door burst open. A man strode in without knocking. Tall and lean with sharp features and eyes that assessed Isla in one sweeping glance. His mark visible on his forearm showed a wolf in profile, second only to Damon's in its complexity. "We have a problem," the man said without preamble. "The High Council just issued an emergency summons. They heard about the incident at the coffee shop, and they're demanding an explanation for why you froze 7 civilians and abducted one of them." "I didn't abduct her." Damon's voice carried an edge of irritation. "Isla came willingly." "Did she?" The man's eyes flicked to Isla, assessing. "Did you tell her she had a choice? Did you explain who you are and what refusing you might mean?" Isla's stomach dropped. She'd thought she'd chosen to come here, thought she'd made a decision. But had she really? When an alpha king tells you to come with him, when he stops people with a single word, when his presence alone makes a room freeze, Is that a choice or just compliance dressed up as autonomy? Silas. Damon's voice carried a warning. Not now. Actually, very much now. Silas moved further into the room, his posture aggressive in a way that seemed designed to provoke. Because if she has an eclipse mark like you suspect, and if the council finds out before we have a plan, they're going to want to study her, contain her, control her, and you know exactly what their definition of study includes. Isla stood abruptly, her chair scraping against the floor. I'm sorry, what? Study me? Contain me? I thought you said this mark meant I was valuable, not dangerous. You're both, Damon said quietly. That's the problem. The room felt too small suddenly. Too warm. The walls were closing in, and Isla couldn't quite catch her breath, and everything was moving too fast, from being mocked in a coffee shop to being told she was valuable, to being told she might be dangerous to learning. There was a council that wanted to study her like a lab specimen. I need to leave. She moved toward the door, but Silas stepped sideways, blocking her path without seeming to. Can't let you do that, he said, not unkindly. You know too much now. And if you walk out that door without protection, without understanding what you are, you're going to become a target for every faction that wants to use an eclipse mark for their own purposes. Use me how? Damon and Silas exchanged a look, some silent communication passing between them that Isla couldn't interpret. The old texts, Damon said finally, suggest that eclipse marks can facilitate bonds between people who shouldn't be able to bond, can bridge pack allegiances that have been at war for generations, can create connections between territories that have remained separate for centuries. He paused. In the right hands, someone with your mark could unite fractured kingdoms, could bring peace to territories that have been fighting since before you were born. And in the wrong hands? Isla's voice was barely a whisper. In the wrong hands, Silas answered, his voice brutal in its honesty. Someone with your mark could be used to force bonds, to create pack allegiances through coercion rather than choice, to essentially enslave entire populations to a single alpha's will. The silence that followed felt heavy enough to crush her. So I'm either a miracle or a weapon, Isla said finally. And everyone's going to want to decide which one I am, everyone except me. Damon moved closer. And this time when he spoke, his voice carried something she hadn't heard before. Vulnerability. Actual, genuine uncertainty. I can't promise you safety if you leave this building. I can't promise you freedom if you stay. What I can promise is that I will do everything in my power to make sure you have a choice in what happens next. He held out his hand, palm up, an offering rather than a demand. Stay here tonight. Let me show the council that you're under my protection. Let me buy us time to figure out what this mark really means and what you want to do with it. And if I say no? His hand didn't waver. Then I'll have Silas escort you wherever you want to go, and I'll do my best to run interference with the council. But Isla, his eyes met hers, and she saw fear, their actual fear, on the face of the most powerful alpha in 5 territories. If they get to you first, I won't be able to protect you. The council has laws older than my kingship, and one of those laws says that anything unknown and potentially dangerous belongs to them until proven otherwise. Isla looked at his outstretched hand. At Silas standing by the door, his expression neutral, but his posture ready to block or protect, depending on her choice. At the window behind Damon's desk, showing a city full of people who'd spent 6 months deciding she was worthless. She thought about Tessa, her roommate, who'd looked at her with pity every morning for half a year. She thought about the coffee shop. About Jake, who'd never quite met her eyes after her mark appeared. About customers who'd learned to look past her like she was furniture. She thought about the group home, about growing up unwanted and unmarked, about learning that love was something that happened to other people. She thought about Damon's hand on her shoulder, the way he'd looked at her like she mattered before he even knew what her mark meant. She thought about having a choice, real or illusory, for the first time in 6 months. Isla reached out and placed her hand in his. The moment their skin made contact, something happened. Not painful, not dramatic, not the explosive mate bond from romance stories, but something, a warmth that spread from their joined hands up her arm, across her chest, settling somewhere near her heart like recognition. Like her body was saying, "Oh, There you are. I've been waiting. Damon's eyes widened slightly. He felt it too, then. This impossible thing that shouldn't exist. Okay, Isla said, her voice steadier than she felt. One night, and then we figure out what happens next. Damon's fingers tightened around hers, gentle but firm. One night, he agreed. Neither of them mentioned that one night might be all they had, before the council came for her. Neither of them mentioned that this fragile truce, this tentative trust might be built on borrowed time. Neither of them mentioned that the warmth spreading from their joined hands felt less like a new bond forming and more like an old one remembered. Behind them, Silas cleared his throat. I'll inform the council that you've taken a person of interest into protective custody. That should buy us about 12 hours before they demand a formal presentation. 12 hours, Damon repeated, still looking at Isla. Still holding her hand like letting go might break something neither of them could repair. 12 hours to figure out if I'm a miracle or a weapon, Isla said, trying for humor and landing somewhere near hysteria. Damon's expression softened into something that looked dangerously close to affection. 12 hours to figure out that you're neither, that you're just Isla, and that might be enough. But as Silas left to make his calls, and as Damon led her deeper into the building toward rooms she'd only imagined existed, Isla couldn't shake the feeling that nothing would ever be simple again. Her mark burned between her shoulder blades, not painful, but present, reminding her with every step that she was no longer invisible. And in a world where being seen meant becoming a target, invisibility had been the only safety she'd ever known. Chapter 3. The First Night. The guest room was nicer than any place Isla had ever lived. That wasn't saying much. She'd spent her childhood in the group home, where 6 girls shared one bathroom, and the mattresses had springs that poked through worn fabric. Her current apartment with Tessa was a step up, but only barely. Thin walls, unreliable heating, neighbors who fought at 3 in the morning, and made the whole building smell like burnt popcorn and regret. This room, though, this room was something else entirely. A 4-poster bed dominated the space, draped in fabric so soft it felt like touching a cloud. The floors were dark wood polished to a mirror shine, covered in rugs that her feet sank into. Floor-to-ceiling windows showed the city at night, lights twinkling like earthbound stars. A private bathroom, marble and chrome, and a tub large enough to swim in, connected through a door that closed with a satisfying, solid click. But the detail that made Isla's chest tighten was the bookshelf. An entire wall of books, organized by color in a way that was purely aesthetic and completely impractical and somehow perfect. Not the practical textbooks from the group home library, or the worn paperbacks she bought from thrift stores. Real books, hardcovers with dust jackets, first editions maybe. The kind of books that were meant to be savored rather than survived. Is this okay? Damon stood in the doorway, not quite entering, giving her space in a way that felt deliberate. I can have Silas arrange something else if you'd prefer. Something less like a fairy tale? Isla finished. She moved to the bookshelf, running her fingers along the spines. Fantasy, mostly. Adventures and quests and chosen ones who saved kingdoms. Stories where the broken protagonist discovered they were special all along. It's perfect. It's just a lot. You can leave whenever you want. His voice was quiet, but she heard the truth in it. The door doesn't lock from the outside. You're not a prisoner, Isla. You're a guest. She turned to face him. A guest who can't actually leave because there's a council that wants to study her like a science experiment. A guest who's choosing to stay for 12 hours to figure out her options, Damon corrected gently. There's a difference. Was there? Isla wasn't sure anymore. The line between choice and coercion felt blurry when the person offering you options was the most powerful alpha in 5 territories. When refusing him meant facing unknown dangers alone. When staying meant accepting protection that might come with a price she didn't yet understand. Damon seemed to sense her uncertainty. He stepped into the room slowly, carefully, like approaching something fragile, and gestured to the chairs by the window. Will you sit with me? Just for a few minutes. I want to explain what happens tomorrow, what you can expect from the council meeting. Isla hesitated, then nodded. They settled into the chairs, the city spread before them like a game board, and for a moment neither of them spoke. The silence felt heavy with unasked questions, with the impossible bond neither of them understood, with the awareness that they were strangers connected by something that shouldn't exist. "Tell me something true," Isla said suddenly. She didn't know where the words came from, didn't know why she felt brave enough to demand anything from him. "Not about the mark or the council or what I'm supposed to be. Tell me something real about you, something that makes you a person instead of just a king." Damon's eyebrows rose slightly. "That's a dangerous question." "Why?" "Because the real things are the ones that hurt." He was quiet for a moment, his gaze fixed on the city below. When he spoke again, his voice carried a weight she hadn't heard before. "I became king when I was 19. My father was murdered by a rival pack, and the throne passed to me before I'd finished learning how to rule. I had to execute the people responsible. Some of them were my father's closest advisors, people I'd known my entire life. I had to make decisions that saved thousands and killed dozens, and every night for the first year, I dreamed about the faces of the people I'd ordered dead, and I wondered if I'd made the right choices." Isla's breath caught. She'd expected something safer, a favorite food, a childhood memory, maybe a hobby. Not this raw confession of trauma and doubt. "I still dream about them sometimes," Damon continued. "Still wonder if there was another way. If I could have been smarter, or faster, or better. If I could have saved everyone, instead of just most people." He looked at her then, and his eyes held something vulnerable and painful. "So when you ask me to tell you something true, Isla, that's what I've got. I'm a king who's haunted by the cost of keeping his kingdom safe, and I'm terrified that whatever this is between us, this bond or connection or whatever we're calling it, is going to force me to make another impossible choice." The honesty of it hit her like a physical blow. Here was the most powerful alpha in 5 territories, the man whose word could freeze a room, admitting to fear and doubt, and the kind of vulnerability that could be weaponized against him, and he'd chosen to show it to her, a nobody with a null mark, a girl from a coffee shop who'd been crying over the cruelty of strangers. "My turn?" Isla's voice came out smaller than she intended. Damon nodded. "I spent my entire childhood thinking I was defective because no one wanted me. The group home had a system when you turned 18. If no one had adopted you, you got a small stipend, and they sent you out to figure out life on your own. Most kids couldn't wait to leave. But She swallowed hard. "I begged them to let me stay. Not because it was home, but because at least there I knew the rules. I knew how to be invisible, how to stay out of the way, how to not need anything from anyone. The outside world felt too big, too uncertain, too full of people who might look at me and decide I wasn't worth their time. And then your mark came," Damon said softly. "And then my mark came, and I thought, this is it. This is proof. I really am defective. Not just unwanted, but biologically proven to be worthless." She laughed, but it came out broken. "For 6 months, I've been walking around with this thing on my back that everyone could see but I couldn't. This announcement of my failure, and I told myself it was fine, that I was used to it, that I didn't need to belong anywhere, because I never had before." "But you did need it," Damon guessed. "But I did need it," Isla agreed. "I needed it so badly that when those people in the coffee shop were laughing at me, part of me thought, they're right. They're just saying out loud what everyone else is thinking, what I'm thinking." Damon reached across the space between their chairs and took her hand. Not possessively, not dominantly, just held it. The warmth from earlier returned, that sense of recognition, of pieces fitting together in a way they shouldn't. "They were wrong," he said firmly. "And you're wrong if you believe them. Whatever this mark means, miracle or weapon or something else entirely, it doesn't mean you're defective. It means you're different. And different is only dangerous to people who profit from sameness." Isla wanted to believe him, wanted to let his certainty fill the hollow places inside her where doubt and shame had lived for so long. But belief was a muscle she'd forgotten how to use. "What if the council is right?" she whispered. "What if I am dangerous? What if this bond thing, whatever it is, can be used to hurt people? What if keeping me around is the impossible choice that haunts you?" Damon's grip on her hand tightened. "Then we figure it out together. We learn what your mark can do, what it can't do, what you want it to do. And we make sure that no one, not the council, not rival packs, Not anyone gets to use you as a weapon without your consent. That's a lot of we for someone you just met. I know. He smiled, and it transformed his face from austere and powerful to something softer, something that made her heart do an uncomfortable flip. But when I touched your mark in the coffee shop, when I felt that bond snap into place. Isla, I've been alive for 32 years. I've touched hundreds of people, shaken hands with alphas, formed pack bonds, even explored the possibility of mate bonds. I've never felt anything like what I felt with you, and maybe that makes me reckless or stupid or too trusting, but I'm choosing to believe it means something. What if it means something terrible? What if it means something wonderful? Damon countered. What if we spend our time worrying about worst-case scenarios and miss the possibility that this could be exactly what both of us need? Isla didn't know how to answer that. Didn't know how to reconcile the king sitting across from her, powerful, certain, willing to protect her, with the reality that she'd woken up this morning thinking her life was just more of the same invisible existence. That 12 hours ago, she'd been nobody. That she was still nobody. Just nobody with a mark that apparently made her valuable. I don't know how to do this, she admitted finally. How to trust. How to believe that someone sees me as more than what I can offer them. How to stop waiting for the moment when you realize I'm not worth the trouble. Damon stood and pulled her to her feet with him, close enough that she had to tilt her head back to meet his eyes. Then let me teach you. One night, remember? 12 hours to figure out what we're doing, and I promise you, Isla, by the time the council demands their meeting tomorrow, you're going to know exactly how valuable you are. Not because of your mark, because of you. Before she could respond, before she could question or doubt or retreat into the safety of cynicism, he did something unexpected. He reached into his pocket and pulled out a small, leather-bound notebook and a pen. Here, he said, pressing them into her free hand. You told me you use stories to escape reality. So let's make a deal. Tonight, before you sleep, I want you to write down one true thing. Not about your mark or the council or what happened today. Just one true thing about yourself that has nothing to do with being valuable or useful or worthy. Just something that's real. Isla looked down at the notebook. The leather was soft, well-made. The kind of quality that spoke of something meant to be kept rather than discarded. What if I can't think of anything? Then write that, Damon said simply. Write, I can't think of anything true about myself that isn't tied to my worth, and then we'll work on that together. But you have to write something, Isla. You have to start seeing yourself as a person with a story, not just a mark with a body attached. It was such a simple request, such a small thing, but it felt enormous. Felt like he was asking her to excavate parts of herself she'd buried so deep she'd forgotten they existed. Okay, she whispered. Damon smiled, a real smile this time, reaching his eyes, transforming his entire face. Okay. He squeezed her hand once more, then released it and moved toward the door. I'll be right down the hall if you need anything. There's food in the kitchen, clothes in the closet that should fit, and every book on that shelf is yours to read if sleep doesn't come easily. He paused in the doorway, looking back at her with an expression she couldn't quite read. Isla, thank you. For what? For trusting me enough to stay. For telling me true things. For not running when you probably should have. His voice dropped lower, intimate in the dim light. And for not looking at me like I'm just a king. I'd forgotten what that felt like. Then he was gone, the door closing softly behind him, and Isla was alone in a room that felt too big and too beautiful and too much like a dream she might wake up from at any moment. She moved to the bed, sank into the impossibly soft mattress, and opened the notebook. The pages were blank, waiting, expectant. One true thing, Damon had said. One thing about herself that wasn't tied to her worth. Isla stared at the empty page for a long time. Her mind offered up a dozen false starts. I'm a barista. I'm from the group home. I have a mark that makes me valuable, but none of those were true things about her. Those were circumstances, situations, external definitions. What was true about Isla that came from inside? What had survived the group home and the rejection and the 6 months of believing she was worthless? Finally, slowly, she began to write. I remember every story I've ever been told. Not just the words, but the way they made me feel. The group home librarian Mrs. Chen used to read to us on Friday nights, and I would close my eyes and disappear into those worlds. I remember the sound of her voice, the way she'd do different accents for different characters, the way she'd pause at the scary parts to build suspense. Even now, when I'm making coffee or walking home or trying to fall asleep, I replay those stories in my head. I've lived 1,000 lives in my imagination, because my real life felt too small, too limiting, too painful. And maybe that's not valuable or useful or worthy, but it's true. It's mine. The stories are mine. She stopped, stared at what she'd written. It felt raw, exposing, like she'd ripped open her chest and shown him something vital and unprotected. But it also felt true, truer than anything she'd said about herself in months. Isla closed the notebook and set it on the nightstand. She should shower, change into whatever clothes Damon had mentioned, prepare herself for tomorrow's meeting with the council, should do all the practical, sensible things. Instead, she walked to the bookshelf and selected a book at random. Fantasy, of course. A cover showing a warrior woman facing down a dragon, determination in every line of her body. Isla climbed into bed, opened the book, and began to read. And for the first time in 6 months, for the first time since her mark had appeared and her world had shattered, she felt something that wasn't shame or fear or resignation. She felt curious about what would happen tomorrow, curious about the bond she'd felt when Damon touched her, curious about who she might become if she let herself believe that different didn't mean defective, curious about what stories she might get to live instead of just imagine. 3 floors below, in his own chambers, Damon stood at his window and stared out at the same city Isla was watching from above. His hand still tingled where he'd held hers, still felt the echo of that impossible bond, still registered the warmth that had nothing to do with temperature and everything to do with connection. Silas appeared in the doorway, silent as always, waiting for permission to speak. She stayed, Damon said without turning around. For now. Silas moved into the room, his posture cautious. The council convenes at 10 tomorrow morning. They're going to want answers about her mark, about the bond, about why you're protecting her. Let them want. Damon, Silas's voice carried a warning. They're going to push. Hard. They're going to suggest containment protocols, observation periods, possibly even binding her power until they understand it. And if you refuse, then I refuse. Damon turned to face his beta, his best friend, the only person who'd stood beside him through every impossible choice and haunted night. I'm not letting them treat her like a specimen. Not letting them strip away her autonomy because they're afraid of what she might become. Even if protecting her costs you the council's support, Silas asked quietly. Even if it fractures the alliances that keep the territory stable? Even if it starts a war you're not sure you can win? Damon was quiet for a long moment. In his mind, he saw Isla's face as she'd admitted to feeling defective. Saw the way she'd tried to make herself smaller, invisible, less than. Saw the exact moment when his words had given her permission to hope. Even then, he said finally. Because the alternative, letting them break her, use her, turn her into a weapon, that's the choice that would haunt me. That's the face I'd see in my dreams for the rest of my life. Silas nodded slowly. Then we prepare for war. Because the council isn't going to let this go, and every pack with an interest in power is going to want a piece of her. We're about to make a lot of enemies, Damon. I know. Damon looked back out the window, up toward where he knew Isla's room was located, where she was probably reading or sleeping, or trying to process everything that had happened. But maybe we'll make an ally too, one who's stronger than any of us realize. Or maybe, Silas said quietly. You're falling for her, and it's clouding your judgment. Damon didn't deny it, couldn't deny it, because the truth was that from the moment he'd seen her crying in that coffee shop, from the moment his hand had touched her shoulder and that bond had snapped into place, he'd felt something shift inside him. Some part of him that had been closed off, protective, solitary, it had cracked open. Let her in, decided she was worth protecting even before he knew what her mark meant. Get some sleep, he told Silas. Tomorrow's going to be brutal. After Silas left, Damon stood at the window for another hour, watching the city sleep, feeling the ghost of Isla's hand in his, and wondering if he was about to make the best decision of his life or the worst. Either way, there was no going back now. The bond was formed, the choice was made, and whatever happened tomorrow, he would face it with her, this broken, beautiful woman who'd survived a lifetime of being told she was worthless and somehow still had the courage to hope. That, Damon thought, was its own kind of strength, its own kind of power. And maybe, just maybe, it was exactly what they both needed. Chapter 4. The Council Chamber. Isla woke to soft knocking on her door, and morning light streaming through windows she'd forgotten to cover. For a disorienting moment, she didn't recognize where she was. The bed was too soft, the room too quiet. The air smelled like expensive fabric softener instead of the mildew that permeated her apartment's walls. Then it all came rushing back. The coffee shop, the mark, Damon, the council meeting that was happening in. She grabbed her phone from the nightstand 2 hours. Isla? A woman's voice, gentle but professional. May I come in? The king sent me to help you prepare. Prepare. As if there was a way to prepare for being examined by a council that saw her as either a miracle or a weapon. As if she could put on the right clothes and say the right words, and somehow convince them she was a person instead of a problem. Come in, Isla called, sitting up and trying to smooth down her hair, which had gone wild during the night. The woman who entered was small and efficient, carrying an armful of garments and wearing an expression that suggested she'd seen everything and been impressed by none of it. Her mark visible on her wrist showed interlocking circles that Isla didn't recognize but assumed meant something official. I'm Helena, the woman said briskly, King Damon's personal assistant. I'm here to help you dress appropriately for the council meeting and brief you on protocol. She laid the clothes across the foot of the bed, elegant pieces in deep jewel tones. Nothing like the cheap cotton Isla usually wore. First question. Have you eaten? No, That won't do. The meeting could last hours, and you'll need your strength. Helena moved to a panel in the wall that Isla hadn't noticed, pressed a button, and spoke into an intercom. Breakfast for 2 in the blue guest room, please. Full spread. She turned back to Isla. Second question. Do you know anything about council protocol? Isla shook her head mutely. Helena's expression softened slightly. Then we have work to do. Come, eat while I explain. We have 90 minutes to turn you from a terrified girl into someone who can hold her own against the most powerful alphas in 5 territories. 30 minutes later, Isla's head was spinning with information. There were 7 council members, Helena explained, each representing a different territory and each with their own agenda. Chancellor Evelyn Thorne from the Eastern Territory's oldest member. Traditional values. Deeply suspicious of anything that disrupted the established order. High Alpha Garrett, from the Western Territory's military background, valued strength above all else, would see Isla as either a weapon to be wielded or a threat to be neutralized. Ambassador Lydia Chen, from the Southern Territories, diplomatic, calculating, would be trying to determine how Isla's mark could benefit her territory's interests. The list went on. Each name came with a description of their mark, their territory's priorities, their likely questions and concerns. Helena spoke while Isla ate fresh fruit, pastries that melted on her tongue, coffee that put her coffee shop's offerings to shame, and tried to absorb information that felt critical and overwhelming in equal measure. Most importantly, Helena said, her voice dropping to something more confidential, remember that you're not on trial. King Damon has invoked protective custody, which means you're under his authority until the council can prove you're a danger. They'll try to intimidate you, to make you feel small and uncertain. Don't let them. You survived the group home, survived 6 months of people treating you as worthless. You can survive a few hours of politicians posturing. Isla looked up sharply. How do you know about the group home? Helena's smile was slight. The king told me. He wanted me to understand who you are, not just what your mark means. He said you're stronger than you believe. She paused. And for what it's worth, I think he's right. You're still here, aren't you? You didn't run. That takes courage most people don't have. Before Isla could respond, another knock came at the door. This time, she recognized the cadence, 2 sharp raps, a pause, then a third. Damon. He entered without waiting for permission, and Isla's breath caught at the sight of him. He'd changed from yesterday's business casual into something formal dark suit perfectly tailored to his frame, his mark visible at his collar in deliberate display of authority. He looked every inch the king, powerful and untouchable and absolutely in control, until his eyes met hers, and something in his expression softened, became human again. "How are you feeling?" he asked. Isla gestured at the spread of information Helena had provided, notes on council members, protocol guidelines, suggested responses to difficult questions. "Like I'm cramming for a test I'm definitely going to fail." "You won't fail." Damon moved closer, nodding at Helena, who quietly excused herself. Once they were alone, he sat on the edge of the bed, near where Isla had curled up with her coffee. "Do you remember what I asked you to write last night?" She did. Had thought about it as she'd fallen asleep, had reread it this morning and felt embarrassed by how revealing it was. "One true thing about myself." "Did you do it?" Isla nodded toward the notebook on the nightstand. Damon's gaze followed, but he didn't reach for it, didn't demand to read what she'd written, just looked back at her with an expression that suggested he already knew it was important. "That's all you need to remember today," he said quietly. "Not the protocol or the council members' names or the perfect way to answer their questions, just that one true thing. That you're a person with a story, not just a mark with a body attached. Everything else is just noise. That's easy for you to say. You've been dealing with the council for years. You know how to play their games." "I do," Damon agreed. "But I also know that the moment you start playing their game, you've already lost. Because their game is about making you prove your worth, and your worth isn't something that needs proving. It just is." Isla wanted to believe him, wanted to carry that certainty into the council chamber and use it as armor against whatever came next. But doubt was a habit she'd practiced for too long to break in a single night. "What if they ask about the bond?" she asked. "What if they want to test it, or study it? Or, then I'll tell them no." Damon's voice carried an edge she hadn't heard before, not quite anger, but close, protective. "The bond between us isn't their business, it's ours. And if they push, I'll remind them that I'm still king, and there are limits to their authority, even if refusing them causes problems for you. Especially then." He reached out and took her hand, that now familiar warmth spreading from the contact. "Isla, I need you to understand something. The council is going to try to drive a wedge between us. They're going to suggest that I'm being manipulated by the bond, that you're using it to influence my decisions, that I can't be objective about your case, and they might be partially right. I can't be completely objective about you. But that doesn't mean I'm wrong to protect you." "How do you know?" "Because in the 19 years I've been king, I've made hundreds of decisions that cost people their lives or their freedom or their happiness. And every single one of those decisions was made objectively, rationally, for the good of the kingdom." He paused, his thumb tracing circles on her palm. "But the decisions I regret most, the ones that haunt me, are the ones where I prioritized logic over compassion, where I treated people as problems to be solved instead of lives to be valued. I'm not making that mistake with you." The honesty of it hit her hard. Here was a king admitting to regret, to failure, to the possibility that his protection might be motivated by something beyond political strategy, and he was doing it without shame, without hiding behind authority or distance. "Damon," Isla said softly, "what happens if the council rules against me, if they decide I'm too dangerous to be left free?" His jaw tightened. "Then we have a problem, because I'm not letting them lock you away, even if it means going against their authority?" Even then, the certainty in his voice should have been reassuring. Instead, it terrified her, because she could see where this was heading, could see the impossible choice forming on the horizon, her freedom or his kingdom, her safety or his alliances, her worth or his power. "I don't want to be the reason you lose everything," she whispered. Damon's other hand came up to cup her face, tilting it so she had to meet his eyes. "You're not the reason. They are. The system that treats people like you as threats instead of treasures, that's the problem. And maybe it's time someone challenged it." Before Isla could respond, Silas appeared in the doorway, his expression grim. "It's time. The council is assembled." The walk to the council chamber felt like a death march. Helena had dressed Isla in deep emerald silk that moved like water, and made her feel simultaneously powerful and exposed. The neckline was high enough to be modest, but the back was open, deliberately displaying her mark for all to see. No more hiding. No more pretending she was something other than what she was. Damon walked beside her, his hand resting lightly on her lower back, not possessive, but present. A reminder that she wasn't facing this alone. Silas walked slightly ahead, his posture that of a soldier, anticipating battle. The council chamber was everything Isla had feared. Massive doors opened into a circular room with a domed ceiling painted with historical scenes she didn't recognize. 7 chairs arranged in a semicircle, each occupied by an alpha whose mark and bearing screamed power. And in the center, a single chair, smaller, lower, obviously meant for the person being questioned. For her, King Damon. The woman in the center chair spoke first, Chancellor Thorne. Isla recognized from Helena's descriptions. Ancient by alpha standards, her silver hair pulled back severely, her mark covering most of her visible neck in patterns so intricate they seemed to move. "Thank you for bringing your guest before us." The pause before guest was deliberate. A reminder that Isla's status was uncertain, that she could just as easily be prisoner as visitor. "Council." Damon's voice carried authority that filled the room. "I present Isla Thorne, under my protective custody, for your observation and questioning regarding her eclipse mark." A murmur ran through the council. Several members leaned forward, their eyes fixed on Isla's exposed back, on the mark they'd only heard about until now. "An eclipse mark," Chancellor Thorne repeated slowly. "I admit, I didn't believe the reports. Hasn't been one in over 3 centuries. Her gaze sharpened. "How do we know it's genuine? How do we know this isn't some elaborate forgery designed to manipulate our king?" "Because I've verified it," Damon said flatly. "The texts are clear about what an eclipse mark looks like, and hers matches perfectly." "You've verified it." "A man to the right," said High Alpha Garrett, built like a warrior, and looking at Isla like she was a problem to be eliminated. "Forgive me, Your Majesty, but you've been king for 19 years. In that time, you've shown remarkable restraint and personal attachments. No mate bond, no favoritism, no emotional compromises. And now, within hours of meeting this girl, you're invoking protective custody and refusing to let us conduct proper assessment? That seems unlike you." The implication was clear. The bond was influencing him, making him weak, compromising his judgment. "What seems unlike me," Damon countered, his voice carrying steel, "is standing by while you treat a person as a specimen to be studied. She's not here for your assessment, Garrett. She's here for your observation." "There's a difference, is there?" Ambassador Chen spoke up from the left, her voice diplomatic but her eyes calculating. "Because from where we sit, Your Majesty, this young woman represents either an opportunity or a threat. Eclipse marks, according to the historical texts, can facilitate bonds that shouldn't exist, can bridge pack allegiances, can fundamentally alter the power structure of territories. If she's genuine, every pack in 5 territories will want to control her. And if you're refusing to let us assess her capabilities, how can we possibly protect her or protect our territories from her?" "You're talking about me like I'm not here," Isla said suddenly. The room went silent. 7 pairs of alpha eyes turned to her, assessing, judging. Chancellor Thorne's eyebrows rose slightly. "So, she speaks," the Chancellor said dryly. "Very well, girl. Tell us about your mark. When did it appear? What can you do with it? Have you formed any unusual bonds?" Isla felt Damon's hand press slightly against her back, not controlling her answer, but reminding her he was there. She took a breath and stepped forward, away from his touch, claiming her own space in the center of their scrutiny. "My mark appeared on my 21st birthday, 6 months ago," she said, keeping her voice steady. "I can't do anything with it. I can't shift. I can't feel pack bonds. I can't control it in any way. And yes, I've formed one bond, with King Damon. It happened when he touched my shoulder yesterday, and neither of us chose it or controlled it. It just was. Convenient," High Alpha Garrett muttered. "Actually no." Isla turned to face him directly. "It's terrifying. It's confusing. It's completely unwanted. I spent 6 months being told this mark meant I was worthless, and now I'm being told it makes me valuable enough that people want to study me or control me or use me. So forgive me if I don't find any of this convenient." A different council member, a woman with kind eyes and a mark showing intertwined vines, spoke up. "What do you want, Isla? If you could choose, what would you do with this mark?" The question caught her off guard. No one had asked what she wanted. Everyone had been too busy debating what she was. "I want to understand it," Isla said slowly. "I want to know what it means, what I can do with it, whether it's something I can control or something that controls me, and I want." She paused, surprised by her own certainty. "I want to make sure that whatever it is, it's mine. Not yours, not any pack's, not anyone's weapon or tool. Mine." Chancellor Thorne studied her for a long moment. "A noble sentiment, but power doesn't work that way, girl. Power belongs to whoever can wield it, whether you like it or not." "Then I'll learn to wield it myself," Isla shot back. "Because the alternative, letting you or anyone else decide how it gets used, that's not acceptable to me." The room went very quiet. Isla could feel the weight of their attention, the danger of having spoken so boldly to people who could destroy her with a word. Then Chancellor Thorne did something unexpected. She smiled. "Well," the Chancellor said, her voice carrying something that might have been respect. "She has spine. I'll give her that." She looked at Damon. "Very well, Your Majesty. Your guest has made her position clear. Now it's time for you to make yours. What exactly are you proposing we do with her?" Damon moved to stand beside Isla, not in front of her, not protecting her from their scrutiny but standing with her in it. "I'm proposing," he said clearly, "that we give her time. Time to understand her mark, to learn what it can do, to decide for herself what role she wants to play. Time to be a person instead of a problem. And I'm proposing that during that time, she remains under my protection, in my territory, where I can ensure she's safe from anyone who might want to use her." "Your protection," Ambassador Chen said carefully, "or your influence?" "Both," Damon admitted. "I won't pretend the bond doesn't exist, or that it doesn't affect my judgment. But I trust that judgment more than I trust what would happen if I handed her over to people who see her as nothing but potential power." High Alpha Garrett stood abruptly. "This is unacceptable. You're compromised, Damon. The bond has made you weak. Made you prioritize one girl over the stability of 5 territories. If you won't submit her for proper assessment, then we have no choice but to..." "But to what?" Damon's voice dropped to something dangerous. "Override my authority? Take her by force? Start a war over a girl who hasn't done anything except exist?" "If necessary," Garrett said flatly. The tension in the room crystallized into something sharp and deadly. Isla could feel it, could feel the moment when words would stop and action would begin, when these powerful alphas would stop debating and start fighting over her like she was territory to be claimed. And suddenly, she understood what the eclipse mark really meant. Not a bridge, a catalyst. The thing that forced people to choose sides, that revealed what they truly valued, that transformed potential into actual conflict. She was about to become the cause of a war, and there was nothing she could do to stop it. If you've ever felt like you had to prove your worth to people who'd already decided you were worthless, drop a comment below. Isla's story is just beginning, and so is yours. Subscribe to see if she becomes the bridge she was meant to be, or if the world breaks her first. FD. Chapter 5. The Breaking Point. Stop. The word came from Isla, quiet but clear, cutting through the tension like a blade. Every alpha in the room turned to look at her, some with surprise, some with disdain, some with curiosity. "Just stop." Isla took a breath, trying to organize thoughts that were spinning too fast, feelings that were too big for her body. "You're all talking about protecting me or assessing me or controlling me, but none of you are actually listening. So, let me make this very simple." She turned to face the full council, forcing herself to meet each pair of eyes in turn. "I don't want to be a weapon. I don't want to be used to start wars or force bonds or manipulate pack alliances, and I definitely don't want to be the reason people kill each other." Her gaze landed on High Alpha Garrett. "So, if your solution is to take me by force, or lock me away or study me like an experiment, Then I have a counter-proposal. Chancellor Thorne leaned forward slightly. We're listening. Let me go. The words felt like pulling out her own heart. King Damon returns me to my apartment, removes his protection, and I go back to being nobody. I hide the mark. I stay invisible. I don't form any more bonds or cause any more problems. You all get to forget I exist, and I get to. Her voice cracked. I get to not be the catalyst that destroys everything. The silence that followed felt crushing. Then Damon spoke, his voice rough with something that sounded like pain. No. Isla turned to him. Damon. No, he repeated, more firmly. That's not a solution, Isla. That's surrender. That's you sacrificing your entire existence because these people can't agree on how to handle something they don't understand. He moved closer, his presence solid and grounding. You deserve more than invisibility. You deserve more than hiding who you are to make other people comfortable. But if I don't hide, people will fight over me, Isla said desperately. You heard him. Garrett said he'd take me by force if necessary. How many people die in that fight? How many lives get destroyed because I was too selfish to just disappear? That's not selfishness, Ambassador Chen said quietly. All eyes turned to her. The diplomat looked thoughtful, her fingers steepled beneath her chin. That's fear talking, and I understand it truly. I do. But Isla, if you disappear now, you're not preventing conflict. You're just delaying it. Because the moment anyone else discovers an eclipse mark exists, the same fight will happen. The same war will start. Except next time, you won't have King Damon's protection. You'll be alone and vulnerable, and at the mercy of whoever finds you first. She's right. The kind-eyed woman with the vine mark added. I'm Council Member Rivera, and I've spent 40 years studying mark manifestations and their patterns. Eclipse marks don't appear randomly, Isla. They appear when the world needs a catalyst, when the existing systems are so broken that only something fundamentally different can change them. Your mark appeared now, in this time, for a reason. What reason? Isla's voice came out broken. What possible reason could justify turning me into a target? Rivera stood and approached slowly, her movements careful and non-threatening. May I see your mark? Up close? Isla glanced at Damon, who nodded slightly. She turned, presenting her back to Rivera, feeling exposed and vulnerable as the council member studied the mark in silence. Fascinating, Rivera murmured. The circle is perfect, no variations, no irregularities. And the line. She traced the air above the mark without touching. It's not just a line, it's a horizon. The point where two things meet and become something new. She stepped back. Isla, your mark isn't about destruction or control. It's about transformation. You're meant to bridge things that are separate, to connect what's been divided. But I can't do that. Isla protested. I don't know how to bridge anything. I can barely keep myself together. Yet you've already done it once, Rivera pointed out. You formed a bond with King Damon, an alpha king whose entire reign has been defined by emotional isolation, by keeping himself separate from everyone to maintain objectivity. And somehow, in one afternoon, you connected with him, in a way no one else has, in 19 years. That's not nothing, Isla. That's extraordinary. Isla felt Damon's gaze on her. Felt the weight of those words settling between them. She'd been so focused on what the bond meant for her safety, that she hadn't considered what it meant for him, that maybe he'd been just as lonely, just as isolated, just as desperate for connection as she had been. Chancellor Thorne cleared her throat. A touching analysis, Rivera, but it doesn't solve our immediate problem. High Alpha Garrett believes the girl should be contained. King Damon refuses to release her from his protection. We have a stalemate that could fracture this council and destabilize the territories. Someone needs to compromise. Then I'll compromise, Damon said. But not the way you're thinking. He moved to stand directly in front of the council, his posture that of a king making a formal proclamation rather than a man negotiating. I propose a trial period. 6 months. Isla remains in my territory under my protection, but she also works with Council Member Rivera to understand her mark and its capabilities. Regular reports are submitted to this council, documenting her progress and any bonds she forms. At the end of 6 months, We reconvene and make a final decision about her status based on actual evidence rather than fear and speculation. And if she proves dangerous during those 6 months, Garrett challenged, if she forms bonds that threaten territorial stability, then I will personally ensure she's contained, Daemon said flatly. You have my word as king, but if she proves to be what Rivera suggests, a bridge rather than a weapon, then you all agree to leave her alone, to let her live her life without constant surveillance or attempts at control. The council members looked at each other, silent conversations happening in glances and small gestures. Isla held her breath, waiting for someone to object, to demand more, to refuse the compromise. Finally, Chancellor Thorne spoke. The council will vote. All in favor of King Daemon's proposal? 5 hands raised. Rivera, Chen, Thorne herself, and 2 others Isla hadn't heard speak. Opposed? 2 hands, Garrett and 1 other. The motion carries, Chancellor Thorne announced. Isla remains under King Daemon's protection for 6 months, during which time she will work with Councilmember Rivera to understand her abilities. Regular reports will be submitted, and we will reconvene at the end of that period to make a final determination. She looked directly at Isla. Do you accept these terms? Isla's throat felt tight. 6 months. Half a year to figure out what she was, what her mark meant, whether she was miracle or weapon or something else entirely. Half a year to decide if the bond with Daemon was real, or just a function of her mark. Half a year to learn if she could be something other than invisible. I accept, she whispered. Then this council is adjourned. Chancellor Thorne stood, and the other members followed suit. King Daemon, we'll expect your first report in 2 weeks. Councilmember Rivera, you'll coordinate with His Majesty regarding assessment schedules. She paused at the door. And Isla? Don't make us regret this decision. Then they were gone, filing out in a rustle of expensive fabric and powerful presence, leaving Isla and Daemon alone in the massive chamber with Silas hovering near the exit. For a long moment, nobody spoke. Then Isla's knees gave out. Daemon caught her before she hit the floor, his arms wrapping around her as she collapsed into him. Not gracefully, not romantically, just complete systemic failure as the adrenaline drained away and left her hollow and shaking. I've got you, Daemon murmured into her hair. You're okay, it's over. For now, Isla managed through chattering teeth. 6 months. And then they decide again if I'm worth keeping alive. Then we make sure those 6 months count. Daemon shifted his grip, lifting her easily into his arms. Silas, clear the path back to my quarters. No one disturbs us for the rest of the day. Already done, Silas said quietly, and Isla realized he'd been on his phone the entire time, presumably coordinating security. I'll have food sent up in an hour. She needs to eat. She needs to sleep, Daemon corrected. And so do I. Wake us if the building's on fire. Otherwise, we're not available. He carried her through corridors that blurred together, through doors that Silas opened and closed, upstairs that Isla couldn't focus on because her entire body was shutting down, not from fear anymore, from relief. From the overwhelming realization that she'd survived something she'd been certain would destroy her. Daemon's quarters were different from the guest room, more personal, more lived in. Books stacked on every surface, papers spread across a desk, a worn leather jacket hanging on a chair. The bed was massive but unmade, the covers twisted like he'd spent a restless night. He set her down on the edge of that bed and crouched in front of her, his hands on her knees, his eyes searching her face. Talk to me, he said. Tell me what you're feeling. Isla laughed, but it came out broken. I don't even know. Relieved? Terrified? Grateful? Angry that I have to prove my worth for 6 months while you all decide if I'm allowed to exist? She shook her head. I offered to disappear, Daemon. I offered to sacrifice everything to avoid conflict. And you wouldn't let me. No, I wouldn't. His voice was firm. Because that's not a solution, Isla. That's just another form of violence, making yourself smaller, invisible, less than. I've watched too many people destroy themselves, trying to fit into spaces that were never meant for them. I wasn't going to let you do the same, even if protecting me causes problems for your kingdom. Especially then. Daemon's hands tightened on her knees. You want to know the truth? The real, ugly truth that I haven't told anyone? Not even Silas? Isla nodded, unable to speak. I'm tired, Damon said quietly. I've been king since I was 19 years old. 19. I've made impossible decisions, sacrificed personal happiness for political stability, kept myself isolated because emotional attachment was a liability I couldn't afford, and I've told myself for 13 years that it was worth it, that the kingdom needed me to be objective and rational and uncompromising. He stood and moved to the window, his back to her, his shoulders tight with tension. But when I walked into that coffee shop yesterday and saw you crying, saw those people mocking you for something you couldn't control, something in me broke. Or maybe it woke up. I don't know. But I looked at you and I thought, here's someone who needs protecting, who deserves protecting. And for once in my life I'm going to choose the person over the politics. Isla stood on shaky legs and moved to stand beside him. The city spread below them, vast and complicated, and full of people with their own marks, their own stories, their own impossible choices. What if choosing me was the wrong decision? She asked softly. Damon turned to face her, and his expression held something raw and vulnerable. Then it's the most wrong decision I've ever made, because for the first time in 13 years, I don't feel like just a king, I feel like a person, and that's worth fighting for. The words hung between them, confession and promise, and terrifying honesty all wrapped together. Isla could see the truth of it in his eyes, could see the loneliness he'd been carrying, the weight of decisions that had cost him pieces of himself, the desperate need for something real in a life built on duty and sacrifice. I don't know how to be someone's reason for changing, Isla whispered. I don't know how to be worth that. You don't have to know. Damon reached up and cupped her face in his hands, his touch gentle despite his strength. You just have to be you, the woman who survived the group home and 6 months of being told she was worthless. The woman who stood in front of the High Council and told them she wouldn't be their weapon. The woman who writes stories in notebooks because imagination is how she survives reality. His thumb brushed across her cheek, catching a tear she hadn't realized had fallen. That woman is worth everything, Isla, and I'll spend the next 6 months proving it to you if that's what it takes. Isla's breath caught. Damon, the bond. How do we know what's real between us and what's just the mark forcing connection? How do we know you're not just being influenced by, I don't care. The words were fierce, absolute. I don't care if it's the bond or fate or just chemistry or something else entirely. What I feel when I'm near you, what I felt when I touched your mark in that coffee shop, that's more real than anything I've experienced in years. And maybe it started with the eclipse mark, but what happens next? That's our choice. Not fate's, not the council's, ours. He was so close now that Isla could feel his breath on her face, could see the gold flecks in his dark eyes, could smell pine and smoke, and something that was uniquely him. Every instinct told her to step back, to protect herself, to maintain distance, because getting close meant risk, and risk meant pain. But she was so tired of protecting herself, so tired of being invisible and safe and alone. I'm scared, she admitted. Me too. Damon's smile was slight, self-deprecating. Terrified, actually, because if this goes wrong, if I lose you at the end of 6 months, I don't know how I'll go back to being the person I was before, the isolated king who didn't let anyone close. You've already changed me, Isla. There's no going back from that. Then I guess we'll have to make sure it doesn't go wrong. The words came out stronger than she felt, but saying them made her believe them a little more. Damon's smile widened into something genuine, something that transformed his entire face. There's the fire I saw in the council chamber. The woman who told Chancellor Thorne her power was her own. That woman was pretending, Isla confessed. She was terrified. The best courage is the kind that happens despite terror. Damon's hand slid from her face to her shoulders, his touch warm and solid and grounding. And Isla? You're allowed to be scared. You're allowed to doubt. You're allowed to have moments where you want to run or hide or disappear. But you're not allowed to do it alone anymore. Whatever happens in the next 6 months, we face it together. Deal? Isla looked up at him, this powerful king who'd been isolated for 13 years, who'd chosen her over political safety, who was looking at her like she was something precious and breakable and worth protecting. And she made a choice. Not because the bond told her to, not because she had no other options, but because, for the first time in her life, Someone was offering her partnership instead of pity, connection instead of charity, genuine care instead of obligation. "Deal," she whispered. Damon pulled her into his arms, then not a romantic embrace, not a prelude to anything more, just comfort. Just two people who'd admitted to being scared and lonely and tired, finding solace in each other's presence. Isla let herself sink into it, let herself feel safe for the first time since her mark had appeared. Let herself believe that maybe, just maybe, she'd found someone who saw her instead of what she represented. They stood like that for a long time, wrapped around each other in the afternoon light, the city continuing on below them while they created their own small world of warmth and possibility. Finally, Damon spoke, his voice rumbling in his chest where Isla's ear pressed against it. "You need to sleep. The adrenaline's wearing off and you're about to crash hard." "So are you," Isla pointed out. "You look exhausted." "Guilty." He pulled back slightly, looking down at her with something soft in his expression. "Stay here. Sleep in my bed where I know you're safe. I'll take the couch in my office." "That's ridiculous," Isla said before she could think better of it. "The bed is massive. We can share it without." She trailed off, feeling heat rise in her cheeks. Damon's eyebrows rose. "Are you sure? I don't want you to feel pressured or—" "I'm sure." And strangely, she was. The bond hummed between them, warm and comfortable, and the thought of being alone right now, of processing everything that had happened in isolation, felt unbearable. Just sleep. Nothing else. Just not being alone. Just not being alone, Damon echoed. And the relief in his voice told her he'd been hoping she'd say that. "I can do that." They settled onto the bed fully clothed, an awkward negotiation of space and boundaries that eventually resolved into Isla, curled on her side with Damon's arm draped over her waist, loose enough that she could escape if she wanted, but present enough to feel comforting. "Isla?" Damon's voice was already drowsy. "Yeah? Thank you. For not running. For staying. For being brave even when you were terrified." Isla smiled into the pillow. "Thank you for not letting me disappear. For seeing me when everyone else just saw a problem." His arm tightened slightly around her waist. "I'll always see you." Within minutes, his breathing had evened out into sleep. Isla lay awake a bit longer, processing everything: the council meeting, the compromise, the 6 months ahead, the impossible bond that had formed between her and a king who'd been alone for 13 years. And for the first time since her mark had appeared, she felt something other than shame or fear or resignation. She felt hope, dangerous, fragile, terrifying hope that maybe her mark wasn't a curse, that maybe being different didn't mean being defective, that maybe she'd found someone who would stand beside her while she figured out who she was meant to become. Isla closed her eyes and let herself sleep, wrapped in warmth and possibility and the steady breathing of someone who'd chosen her over everything else. The next 6 months would determine her fate, but right now, in this moment, she was safe, and that was enough. Chapter 6. The training begins. 3 weeks passed in a blur of lessons, revelations, and moments that felt suspended between reality and dream. Isla moved through her days in a strange new rhythm. Mornings with council member Rivera, learning about mark theory and energy manipulation. Afternoons with Damon handling the administrative chaos of running a kingdom while she worked quietly in his office. Evenings that stretched into late nights, where they talked about everything and nothing until exhaustion forced them to sleep. They still shared his bed. It had become an unspoken agreement after that first night. Neither of them slept well alone anymore. Both of them needed the comfort of another presence. Nothing happened beyond sleep and occasional drowsy conversations, but the intimacy of it felt more significant than any physical act. Learning how someone breathed in sleep, how they shifted positions through the night, the small sounds they made when dreams turned uncomfortable. Those were the details that built real connection. "Focus, Isla." Rivera's voice pulled her back to the present. They sat in a private training room deep in the palace, walls lined with mirrors that reflected Isla's frustration back at her from every angle. "You're thinking too hard. Mark manipulation isn't about conscious control. It's about intention." "I don't know what that means," Isla said, not for the first time. 3 weeks of training and she still couldn't make her mark do anything. Couldn't feel the energy Rivera insisted was there. Couldn't sense the connections her mark was supposedly capable of creating. "Maybe I'm broken in a different way," Maybe eclipse marks are supposed to be able to do things, and mine just can't. I can't. Rivera sighed and set down the ancient text she'd been consulting. You're not broken. You're blocked. There's a difference. She moved to sit beside Isla on the training mat. Tell me something. When did you start believing you were worthless? The question hit harder than expected. I don't know. Always? The group home made it pretty clear that unwanted children were a burden. And then the mark appeared and confirmed it. Except your mark didn't confirm anything, Rivera corrected gently. The people around you interpreted it as worthless because they didn't know what it was. But you internalized that interpretation. You made it your truth. And now, even though you intellectually know your mark is rare and powerful, you still fundamentally believe you don't deserve that power. So your mark responds to that belief. It stays dormant because you're unconsciously telling it to. Isla stared at her. That's not fair. I can't just decide to believe something different. No, you can't decide it consciously. But you can create experiences that challenge the belief. Rivera stood and offered her hand. Come on. We're trying something different today. 20 minutes later, Isla found herself standing in what Rivera called the connection room. A circular space with a raised platform in the center and observation windows along the walls. Through one window, she could see Damon and Silas watching, their expressions carefully neutral. What is this? Isla asked nervously. An experiment. Rivera gestured to the platform. I'm going to bring in 3 people strangers to you, from different packs and territories. Your job is simple. Talk to them. Learn about them. Find something you genuinely connect with in each one. And while you're doing that, I want you to pay attention to what you feel here. She tapped Isla's chest, right over her heart. Not what you think. What you feel. Before Isla could protest that this seemed like a terrible idea, Rivera was opening a door and ushering in the first person. He was young, maybe early 20s, with nervous energy and a mark on his forearm showing a bird in flight. He looked as uncomfortable as Isla felt. Isla, this is Thomas, Rivera said. Thomas, Isla, you have 15 minutes, talk. Then she left, closing the door behind her with a decisive click. Awkward silence filled the space. So, Thomas said finally, this is weird, right? Despite everything, Isla laughed. Extremely weird. Do you know why we're here? They told me I'd be helping with some kind of mark research. Didn't mention I'd be making awkward small talk with the kings. He trailed off, uncertainty crossing his face. Sorry, I don't actually know what you are to him. The rumors are all over the place. I don't know either, Isla admitted honestly. We're figuring it out. Something in Thomas relaxed at her honesty. Yeah? That's actually kind of nice. Everyone always acts like they have everything figured out, you know? Like there's some manual for life that I never got a copy of. Right? Isla moved to sit on the edge of the platform, and after a moment, Thomas joined her. I spent my whole life feeling like everyone else understood rules I couldn't see, like they were all playing a game and I was just watching from the outside. The group home, Thomas said quietly. I heard about that. I was in one too. Different territory, but same experience. That constant feeling of being temporary, of not quite belonging anywhere. Isla's chest tightened. You understand. Yeah. Thomas smiled, but it was edged with old pain. I got my mark at 18 standard bird. Nothing special. Got adopted by a pack immediately, because they needed numbers for territorial negotiations. Didn't matter that I was a person. I was a body that could shift, and that was enough. He looked at her. At least you have someone who sees you as more than your mark. Before Isla could respond, she felt it. A warmth in her chest, spreading outward like ripples in water. Not the bond she felt with Damon, this was different. Softer, less intense, but unmistakably there. Connection. Genuine, human connection based on shared experience and understanding. Her mark burned not painfully, but noticeably. Present. Thomas gasped. What was that? I felt something. Like, recognition? I don't know how to describe it. Isla looked down at her hands and saw faint light tracing patterns across her skin. temporary marks that glowed and faded like aurora borealis. I think my mark is responding to the connection between us." The door opened. Rivera stood there with an expression of satisfaction. "Excellent, Thomas, thank you. You can go. Isla, stay there. 2 more to go." The second person was a woman named Kira, sharp-eyed and skeptical, with a mark showing geometric patterns that suggested pack hierarchy. She didn't want to talk at first, clearly resenting being volunteered for whatever this was. But Isla, still buzzing from the success with Thomas, tried something different. Instead of forcing conversation, she just asked, "What do you wish people understood about you that they never ask?" Kira blinked, surprised. Then, slowly, "That being part of pack hierarchy doesn't mean I don't have my own thoughts. Everyone assumes I just parrot whatever my alpha says, but I chose this position. I believe in the structure, and I'm tired of people treating that like it makes me weak or brainwashed." "That's not weak," Isla said softly. "That's knowing what you need and choosing it deliberately. That takes strength." Kira studied her for a long moment. "You really mean that?" "I do. I spent years being told I wasn't enough because I didn't fit the system. But maybe the problem isn't people who don't fit. Maybe it's people who do fit feeling like they have to apologize for it." Another warmth, another connection, another moment where her mark flared with that strange, beautiful light. The third person was older, a man named David, with silver in his hair and a mark so faded Isla almost couldn't make it out. He sat down heavily and just said, "I lost my mate 6 months ago. Car accident. Everyone tells me I'll find another bond eventually, that eclipse marks can facilitate that. I don't want another bond. I want to know if you can help me feel less alone, without replacing what I lost." Isla's throat tightened. "I can't replace what you had. But..." She reached out and took his hand, surprised by her own boldness. "I know what it's like to be alone, to feel like you're walking through the world as a ghost, while everyone else is really living. And I know that sometimes, you don't need solutions. You just need someone to sit with you in the loneliness and acknowledge that it's real." David's eyes filled with tears. "Thank you. No one said that. They all want to fix it." "I can't fix it," Isla whispered. "But I can witness it. If that helps." The warmth that spread through her chest this time was different, deeper, tinged with sorrow and understanding, and the strange comfort of shared grief. Her mark blazed so bright she could see the reflection in the mirrors. A perfect circle filled with horizontal light, like a sunrise contained in ink. When David left, Rivera entered with an expression Isla had never seen before. "Awe. Do you understand what you just did?" Rivera asked. Isla shook her head mutely. "You formed 3 different types of bonds. Thomas, a connection based on shared experience. Kira, a connection based on mutual respect and understanding. David, a connection based on empathy and witnessing." Rivera moved closer, her voice intense. "Most people can only form one type of bond in their lifetime, mate bonds, or pack bonds, or familial bonds. But you just demonstrated 3 different connection types in under an hour. And more importantly, you did it consciously, with intention, without forcing anything. I still don't understand what that means." "It means," said a new voice, "that you're more powerful than anyone realized." Isla spun to find Chancellor Thorne standing in the doorway, her expression unreadable. Behind her, through the observation window, Isla could see Damon standing abruptly, his posture protective. "Chancellor," Rivera said carefully. "This is a closed training session, which I have every right to observe as a council member," Thorne replied smoothly. She entered the room, her gaze fixed on Isla. "I've been watching for the past hour. Very illuminating." She circled Isla slowly, assessing. "Tell me, girl, when you formed those bonds, could you feel the other person's emotions, their thoughts? Could you influence them?" "No," Isla said quickly. "It wasn't like that. It was just understanding. Connection. Nothing invasive." "Are you certain?" Thorne's voice carried an edge. "Because from where I stood, it looked very much like you were manipulating their emotional states, making them trust you, opening them up, creating bonds that gave you access to their inner worlds." Isla's stomach dropped. "I wasn't manipulating anyone. I was just talking to them, being honest. Honest. Thorn stopped in front of her. Or strategic. After all, you've been spending 3 weeks with King Daemon, learning how to navigate political waters. Perhaps you've learned more than mark control. Perhaps you've learned how to use emotional vulnerability as a weapon. That's enough. Daemon's voice cut through the room like a blade. He'd entered without Isla noticing, Silas close behind. You're overstepping, Chancellor. Am I? Thorn turned to face him. Or am I the only one willing to acknowledge what we all just witnessed? She formed 3 separate bonds in under an hour. Daemon, bonds that gave her access to people's deepest vulnerabilities, their fears, their grief. And she did it so smoothly, so naturally, that it didn't even register as manipulation until I pointed it out. Because it wasn't manipulation, Daemon said firmly. He moved to stand beside Isla, his presence solid and protective. It was genuine connection, empathy. The thing that makes someone human instead of just powerful. And what happens when someone with that much empathic ability decides to use it for less noble purposes? Thorn challenged. What happens when she realizes she can form bonds with anyone, access their emotional vulnerabilities, and influence their decisions without them even realizing it? How is that different from mind control? The words hit Isla like physical blows, because there was a terrible logic to them, because she had felt the connections forming, had felt herself understanding these strangers on a level that went beyond normal conversation. And what if Thorn was right? What if this gift could be weaponized? What if she was dangerous in ways she hadn't even considered? Isla. Daemon's hand found hers, squeezing gently. Don't listen to her. What you did today was beautiful. It was connection, not control. But she's right, Isla whispered. I could feel them, Daemon. Their pain, their loneliness, their need for understanding. And I used that to create bonds. How is that different from manipulation? Intent, Rivera said firmly, stepping between Isla and Thorn. The difference is intent, Chancellor, as you well know. Manipulation requires deception, making people believe something false to serve your agenda. Isla was honest about who she is and what she understands. The bonds formed because those people recognized genuine empathy, not because she tricked them into trusting her. A convenient distinction, Thorn replied, but one that relies entirely on Isla's continued good intentions. And intentions can change, Councilmember Rivera, especially when someone realizes how much power they truly wield. Is that a threat? Daemon's voice had gone very quiet, very dangerous. It's a concern, Thorn corrected. One I'll be noting in my report to the full council. We agreed to 6 months of observation. Well, I've observed, and what I've seen suggests that Isla's abilities go far beyond simple bridge building. She's capable of forming bonds with anyone, of accessing their emotional vulnerabilities, of creating connections that could be leveraged for significant influence. She looked directly at Isla. I'm not saying you're evil, girl. I'm saying you're dangerous. And dangerous things need to be monitored very carefully. Then she left, her departure as dramatic as her entrance, leaving Isla standing in a room that suddenly felt too small, too exposed, too full of mirrors showing her reflection from every angle. She looked dangerous. She looked powerful. She looked exactly like what Thorn had accused her of being. She's wrong, Daemon said quietly. But his voice carried uncertainty now, doubt creeping in around the edges. Is she? Isla pulled her hand from his, wrapping her arms around herself. Because she's right about one thing. I did access those people's vulnerabilities. I did use understanding to create bonds. And I can't promise that I'll never be tempted to use that power for something less than pure. Isla. No, she stepped back, needing space, needing air, needing distance from the mirrors showing her all these versions of herself she didn't recognize. I need to think. I need to process this. Alone. She didn't wait for permission. Just walked out of the training room, through corridors that had become familiar, upstairs to Daemon's quarters where she locked herself in the bathroom and finally let herself break. Because Thorn was right. The power she'd felt today, the ability to connect, to understand, to form bonds, it was intoxicating. And the terrible truth was that part of her had enjoyed it, had enjoyed being seen as powerful instead of worthless, had enjoyed watching people open up to her, had enjoyed the warmth of connection after a lifetime of isolation. And if she'd enjoyed it, if she'd wanted it, then how far was she from using it? From manipulating instead of connecting? From becoming the weapon everyone feared? Isla stared at her reflection in the bathroom mirror, the same face she'd been seeing her whole life. But somehow, different now, marked, changed, powerful in ways that terrified her. And for the first time since her mark had appeared, she wondered if maybe invisibility hadn't been a curse after all. Maybe it had been protection. Protection from becoming something she'd never wanted to be. Something dangerous. Chapter 7. The distance between. Isla didn't come out of the bathroom for 2 hours. When she finally emerged, red-eyed and hollow, Damon was sitting on the floor outside the door. Not pacing, not demanding entry, not trying to force his way in. Just sitting, waiting. "I thought you'd have work to do," she said, her voice rough from crying. "I do." He stood slowly, like approaching something fragile. "But nothing more important than this, than you." The words should have been comforting. Instead, they felt like pressure, like she was failing him by being weak, by doubting, by not being strong enough to brush off Thorne's accusations and continue forward with confidence. "I need some space," Isla said. The words tasted like betrayal. "Not forever. Just, I need to think without you looking at me like I'm about to break." Something flickered across Damon's face. Hurt, maybe, or fear, but he masked it quickly. "Okay. Do you want to go back to the guest room? Or my apartment?" The decision surprised her even as she said it. "I need to go home. See Tessa. Be in a space that's mine for a little while." Damon was quiet for a long moment. "The council won't like that. You're supposed to be under my protection, in my territory." "Your territory is the entire northern region," Isla pointed out. "My apartment is 10 minutes from here. That still counts." "You know that's not what they meant." "I don't care what they meant." The words came out sharper than intended. "I can't breathe here, Damon. Everything is about the mark and the bonds and what I'm capable of and what I might become. I need one night where I'm just Isla. Not the eclipse mark, not the potential weapon. Just me." She could see him wanting to argue, wanting to insist that she stay where he could protect her, where he could monitor her safety. But something in her expression must have convinced him, because he just nodded. "One night," he said quietly. "But Silas will be nearby, and you call me if anything feels wrong." "Deal?" "Deal." 20 minutes later, Isla stood outside her apartment door, with a bag of clothes she'd barely remembered packing, and a heart that felt too heavy for her chest. She could hear the TV through the door, some reality show Tessa loved, and for a moment she just stood there, remembering who she'd been 3 weeks ago. The invisible barista with a null mark who'd learned to make herself small and quiet and forgettable. That person felt like a stranger now. She unlocked the door and stepped inside. "Isla?" Tessa appeared from the kitchen, freezing mid-step. "Oh my God. Oh my God." She rushed forward, pulling Isla into a hug that smelled like cheap shampoo and the lavender candles she loved. "Where have you been? I've been so worried. You just disappeared, and then there were all these rumors about the king and the council, and are you okay? Are you hurt? Did they—" "I'm fine," Isla said, but her voice broke on the words. "I'm fine, can we sit? I need to tell you everything." They settled onto the worn couch that had come with the apartment, and Isla told her everything. The coffee shop, the mark revelation, Damon, the council meeting, the training, the bonds, Thorne's accusations. Tessa listened without interrupting, her expression cycling through shock and fear, and something that looked unsettlingly like awe. "So you're basically magic," Tessa said when Isla finally ran out of words. "You can form bonds with anyone, make them trust you. That's incredible, Isla. Is it?" Isla pulled her knees to her chest. "Or is it just manipulation with better branding? That's not the same thing at all." Tessa shifted to face her fully. "Manipulation is about control, about making people do what you want. What you described, connecting with those people, understanding them, creating genuine empathy, that's not control. That's just being good at reading people and responding to what they need. But what if I use it for the wrong reasons? What if I get comfortable with that power and start leveraging it? What if Thorn is right, and I'm dangerous? Tessa was quiet for a moment, then, do you want to use it for wrong reasons? No buts. Tessa took her hand. Isla, I've known you for 3 years. I watched you cry yourself to sleep when that mark appeared. I watched you hide it under high collars and strategically placed scarves. I watched you make yourself invisible because you thought that's what you deserved. And now you're sitting here, more powerful than most people will ever be, and you're terrified of it. You know what that tells me? That I'm weak? That you're good. Tessa squeezed her hand. Bad people don't worry about becoming bad. They just do whatever serves them and justify it later. The fact that you're questioning yourself, that you're scared of your own power, that's proof that Thorn is wrong. You're not dangerous because you're powerful. You'd only be dangerous if you were powerful and didn't care. The words settled into Isla's chest, warm and solid. Not quite belief, but close enough to breathe around. When did you get so wise? Isla asked. I've always been wise. You were just too busy hating yourself to notice. Tessa smiled, then her expression turned serious. But Isla, I need to ask you something. This King Damon, are you in love with him? The question caught her off guard. I don't know. Maybe? It's complicated. There's the bond. And I can't tell how much of what I feel is real, and how much is just the mark forcing connection. Forget the mark for a second, Tessa said. When you're with him, how do you feel? Isla closed her eyes, remembering. The way Damon looked at her like she mattered. The conversations that stretched into late night, both of them too engaged to notice time passing. The warmth of sleeping beside someone who made her feel safe instead of vulnerable. The way he'd stood beside her in the council chamber, choosing her over political convenience. I feel seen, she whispered. For the first time in my life, I feel like someone actually sees me. Not what I can offer, not what I represent, just me. Then that's real, Tessa said firmly. Bond or no bond, that's real. And if Chancellor Thorn or anyone else tries to convince you that your feelings are just manipulation, you tell them to go to hell. Despite everything, Isla laughed. I don't think I can tell a council member to go to hell. Then I'll do it for you. Tessa grinned. Seriously though, what's your plan? You can't hide here forever. I'm not hiding. I'm processing. Isla. Okay, maybe I'm hiding a little. She sighed. I just need one night where I'm not the eclipse mark or the potential weapon or the king's. Whatever I am. I need to remember who I was before all of this. Do you want to know what I think? Tessa asked. Always. I think who you were before is still who you are now. You're still the girl who survived the group home. Still the one who loves stories and makes terrible coffee and stays up too late reading fantasy novels. The mark didn't change that. It just added layers. And yeah, some of those layers are scary and powerful and complicated, but they're still you. You don't have to choose between being Isla and being the eclipse mark. You can be both. Isla let the words sink in, testing them against the fear that had been living in her chest since Thorn's accusations. Could she be both? Could she be powerful and good, capable and careful, connected to others without losing herself? She didn't know. But maybe that was okay. Maybe not knowing was part of the process. Thank you, she said quietly. Always. Tessa stood and pulled her to her feet. Now, I ordered pizza because I'm broke, and you disappeared with all your shifts, and we're going to watch terrible reality TV, and pretend the world isn't complicated for a few hours. Sound good? Sounds perfect. They settled into their old rhythm pizza on paper plates because neither of them wanted to do dishes, commentary on the ridiculous drama unfolding on screen. Tessa's running commentary about everything that had happened at the coffee shop since Isla left. It felt normal, grounding, like maybe she could have both worlds, the powerful one with Damon and the council, and this simple one with cheap pizza and a roommate who'd never treated her differently. Her phone buzzed around 11. A text from Damon. Are you okay? Isla smiled despite herself. I'm fine. Eating pizza and watching bad TV with Tessa. That sounds nice. A pause, then. I miss you. Her heart did that uncomfortable flip. It's been 4 hours. I know. Still miss you. Isla stared at the words, feeling the warmth spread through her chest. The bond, maybe, or just genuine affection, or some combination she couldn't untangle. I miss you too. Take all the time you need. I'll be here when you're ready. She set the phone down and found Tessa watching her with knowing eyes. He's texting you, isn't he? Maybe. And you're smiling like an idiot. I am not. Isla caught sight of her reflection in the darkened TV screen. She was absolutely smiling like an idiot. Okay, fine. Maybe a little. That's love, Isla. Or close enough to it that the difference doesn't matter. Before Isla could respond, her phone rang. Not Damon this time. A number she didn't recognize. She almost didn't answer. But something, instinct or curiosity or just the nagging feeling that ignoring unknown numbers never ended well, made her pick up. Hello? Isla. The voice was familiar and wrong all at once. Male, smooth, carrying an edge of amusement. I hope I'm not interrupting your evening. Ice flooded her veins. Who is this? Someone who's been watching you with great interest. Someone who understands what you're capable of, unlike that fool Damon, who treats you like a fragile thing that needs protecting. How did you get this number? I have resources. The voice carried a smile she could hear. But that's not important. What's important is that I'm offering you a choice, Isla. Continue playing house with the Northern King, letting him and his council limit your potential, questioning every connection you make. Or, he paused for effect. Come work with me. Learn what you're really capable of. Discover power that doesn't come with guilt or doubt or constant surveillance. I'm hanging up. Before you do, consider this. How long before Damon starts seeing you the way Thorn does? How long before the doubt creeps in, and he starts wondering if your bond is real or just manipulation? How long before everyone you care about starts fearing you? Another pause. I'm offering you freedom, Isla. A place where your power is celebrated instead of monitored. Think about it. The line went dead. Isla sat frozen, the phone still pressed to her ear, her heart hammering against her ribs. Who was that? Tessa asked, her voice tight with concern. I don't know. Isla's hands were shaking. Someone who knows about my mark. Someone who wants to use me. Did he threaten you? No, worse. He offered me exactly what part of me wants to hear. She looked at Tessa, feeling panic rising. Someone's been watching me, Tessa. Someone knows where I am, knows my number, knows about my training with Rivera, and they're trying to recruit me. Tessa grabbed her own phone. I'm calling Damon. No. Isla caught her hand. Not yet. I need to think. If we call him now, he'll come here, pull me back into protective custody. Probably lock me away somewhere even more secure. And whoever that was, will know they got to me. Will know they made me scared enough to run back to protection. But Isla, one night, Isla said firmly. You said I could have one night to process. I'm processing. And part of that is figuring out how to handle threats without immediately running to someone else for protection. She stood, moved to the window, and peered out at the dark street below. Somewhere out there, Silas was watching. Probably had been the whole time. I'm not helpless. I'm not fragile. And I'm not going to let some mysterious voice on the phone make me forget that. But her hands were still shaking as she closed the curtains. And somewhere in the building across the street, a figure watched the lights go out in Isla's apartment and smiled. The game was accelerating. The pieces were moving into position. And soon, very soon, Isla would have to choose which side of the board she belonged on. The question was whether she'd choose the king who protected her, or the power that called to something darker in her soul. 3 floors below Isla's apartment, Silas stood in shadow and spoke quietly into his phone. She got a call. Unknown number. Lasted 90 seconds. He listened to Damon's response, watched the windows above. I know, but if we pull her back now, we confirm that she can't handle threats on her own. We make her dependent. Is that what you want? More listening. Then, understood, I'll maintain surveillance. But Damon, whoever's targeting her, they're not working alone. This is coordinated, and they're not going to stop just because she's under your protection. He hung up and settled in for a long night of watching. Because that's what you did when someone you served fell in love with someone who might be the salvation or destruction of everything he'd built. You watched, you waited, and you prepared for the moment when protection wouldn't be enough, when love would demand sacrifice, and someone would have to pay the price. If you are still here with me, please smash the like button and subscribe. Chapter 8. The Choice. Isla didn't sleep that night. She lay in her old bed, too small, too familiar, smelling like the cheap detergent from the laundromat down the street, and stared at the ceiling while her mind raced. The mystery caller's words echoed on repeat. How long before Damon starts seeing you the way Thorn does? The terrible thing was that she'd already been asking herself the same question. She'd seen the flicker of doubt in his eyes when Thorn had accused her of manipulation, had felt him hesitate before taking her hand. Small things, barely noticeable, but there, growing. The bond they shared, was it real or manufactured? Did he care about her, or was he just responding to Mark-induced connection he couldn't control? And more importantly, did it matter? Her phone buzzed at 6 in the morning. Damon, council emergency meeting at 9. They're demanding your presence. I'll send a car at 8:30. No good morning. No, how did you sleep? Just the facts, efficient and distant. Or maybe she was reading into it. Maybe this was just how he communicated when handling official business. Maybe the warmth between them only existed in private moments. And she'd been foolish to expect it to translate to text messages. I'll be ready, she sent back. She arrived at the palace at 8:45, dressed in clothes Helena had sent, elegant but severe, all sharp lines and dark colors that made her look older, more serious, more like someone who should be taken seriously rather than feared. Damon met her at the entrance, and the relief on his face was so naked it hurt to see. You came back, he said quietly. You asked me to. I wasn't sure you would. He reached for her hand, then seemed to think better of it and let his arm drop. About last night. Later. Isla interrupted. She couldn't have this conversation now, not with the council waiting. What's the emergency? His expression darkened. 3 packs reported unusual activity overnight. People forming bonds that shouldn't exist. Pack allegiances shifting without alpha approval. Mates suddenly questioning bonds they'd held for years. All of them within a 100-mile radius of the palace. Isla's stomach dropped. They think I did it. They think your presence is causing instability. That your mark is affecting people's bonds without conscious control on your part. He started walking, and she fell into step beside him. Rivera thinks it's possible. If your power can create new connections, maybe it can also disrupt existing ones. But I haven't done anything. I've been at my apartment all night. Doesn't matter. The effect might not require conscious effort. Your mark might be broadcasting, influencing everyone within range. He glanced at her. Or someone might be deliberately causing chaos and blaming it on you. The mystery caller. It had to be. Damon, last night I got a call. I know. Silas reported it. His jaw tightened. I wanted to come get you immediately, but he convinced me that you needed to prove you could handle threats independently. I'm still not sure that was the right call. It was. Isla caught his arm, making him stop and look at her. I'm not a child who needs constant supervision. If I'm going to survive in this world, if I'm going to be something other than a weapon or a victim, I need to learn how to face danger without running to you for protection every time. Something shifted in his expression. You're right. I know you're right. But Isla, you're not just anyone to me. You're... He trailed off, seeming to struggle with the words. Whatever this bond is, real or manufactured or something in between, it's made me care about you in a way that terrifies me. And when you're in danger, my first instinct is to lock you away somewhere safe where nothing can touch you. I know that's not what you need, but it's what every part of me wants to do. The honesty of it stole her breath. Damon. Later, he echoed her word from earlier. Like you said, the council is waiting. They entered the chamber together, and Isla immediately knew something was very wrong. All 7 council members were present, but they weren't alone. Behind each one stood additional figures, alphas from their territories, witnesses or reinforcements, or both. And in the center of the room, where the single questioning chair usually sat, there was now a different setup entirely. A circular platform, 7 lines of silver drawn on the floor, radiating out from the center like spokes of a wheel, and at each endpoint, a person standing in restraints. Isla recognized them immediately. Thomas, Kira, David, the 3 people she'd bonded with during training, plus 4 others she didn't know, all looking terrified and confused. "What is this?" Damon's voice carried dangerous undertones. "I agreed to a meeting, not a trial. This is an assessment," Chancellor Thorne said coldly. "We need to understand the extent of Isla's abilities and the nature of her influence." These 7 individuals all reported unusual bond sensations, overnight feelings of connection to someone they'd never met, compulsions to seek out the palace, unexplained emotional attachments. When questioned, they all described the same source. "Isla." "That's impossible," Isla said. "I only met 3 of them, and that was weeks ago. I've never seen the other 4. Haven't you?" High Alpha Garrett stepped forward, and Isla saw triumph in his expression. "Or perhaps your mark is spreading bonds without your knowledge. Perhaps every person you've ever connected with becomes a potential vessel for your influence. A puppet on invisible strings." "That's not what's happening." Rivera moved to stand beside Isla. "Eclipse marks don't work that way. They require conscious connection, genuine empathy. You can't form bonds with strangers through walls and distance." "Then explain this." Garrett gestured to the 7 people. "Explain why they all woke up feeling connected to her. Explain why pack bonds are destabilizing across the territory. Explain why she's become a walking contagion." "I'm not a contagion," Isla said, but her voice shook, because she didn't know, couldn't know. What if they were right? What if her mark was affecting people without her permission or awareness? "We're going to find out." Thorne moved to the platform. "Isla, step into the center. We're going to test the bonds these people claim to feel. And we're going to see if you can control them, manipulate them, or break them at will." "And if I refuse?" Isla asked. "Then we'll assume you're refusing because you know what we'll discover," Garrett said smugly. "That you're exactly what I've said from the beginning, a threat that needs to be contained." Damon stepped between Isla and the platform. "You're not doing this. This wasn't part of our agreement. The 6 months aren't up. You don't have the authority." "We have every authority," Thorne interrupted, "when the safety of multiple packs is at risk. King Damon, step aside, or we'll be forced to question whether your judgment has been compromised by your bond with her." The threat hung in the air, clear and cutting. They weren't just testing Isla. They were testing Damon, forcing him to choose between protecting her and maintaining his authority as king. And Isla realized with sudden clarity what the mystery caller had been preparing her for. This moment. This choice. When she would have to decide whether to submit to their test to prove her innocence through their degrading examination, or to refuse and confirm every fear they'd been nurturing. "I'll do it," she said quietly. "Isla, no," Damon started. "I'll do it," she repeated, stronger this time. "Because I have nothing to hide. Because I'm not afraid of what you'll find." She looked directly at Thorne. "But I have conditions." Thorne's eyebrow rose. "You're not in a position to negotiate." "Aren't I?" Isla stepped forward, and something in her posture must have changed because several council members shifted uncomfortably. "You want me to prove I'm not manipulating people? Fine. But I want every bond in this room examined. Not just mine, yours too. Because if we're looking for manipulation and control, let's be thorough. Let's see who's really pulling strings." The room went very quiet. "You dare," Garrett began. "I dare." Isla cut him off. "You've spent weeks painting me as a threat, but maybe the real threat is people who are so afraid of power they don't control, that they'll manufacture evidence to justify their fear." She turned slowly, meeting each council member's gaze. "So here's my offer. Test me. Examine my bonds. But do it fairly. Bring in an independent assessor, not Rivera, not anyone loyal to Damon, someone completely neutral. And if they find evidence that I've been manipulating people against their will, I'll submit to whatever containment you deem appropriate." "And if they don't find evidence?" Ambassador Chen asked carefully. "Then you leave me alone. All of you. No more surveillance, no more reports, no more treating me like a problem waiting to happen. I get to live my life, And you deal with whatever's actually destabilizing pack bonds because it's not me. Thorn studied her for a long moment. You're very confident for someone who claims not to understand her own power. I'm not confident, Isla admitted. I'm terrified. But I'm more afraid of spending the rest of my life being treated like a weapon than I am of whatever you'll discover in your test. So, let's do this. Let's find out the truth. Agreed, Thorn said finally. We'll bring in Master Aldrich from the Eastern Territories. He's a mark specialist with no territorial allegiances. He'll conduct the assessment, and we'll all abide by his findings. When? Damon asked, his voice tight. He's already here, Thorn said, and right on cue, a door opened. The man who entered was ancient, older than anyone Isla had ever seen. His face weathered like carved wood, his mark so faded it was barely visible, but his eyes were sharp and clear, assessing everything in the room with one sweeping glance. Master Aldrich. Thorn bowed slightly. Thank you for coming on such short notice. You said there was an eclipse mark. His voice was surprisingly strong. I had to see for myself. Haven't encountered one in 70 years. He approached Isla, peering at her face. You're very young, very scared. Good. Fear means you're still human. As opposed to? Isla asked. As opposed to what you could become if you let power convince you that other people are just resources. He gestured to the platform. Come, let's see what you really are. The assessment took 3 hours. Master Aldrich examined each of the 7 people who claimed to feel connected to Isla, asking questions about the nature of their bond, testing their responses to her presence and absence, having her attempt to influence their emotions while he monitored both parties. And slowly, a picture emerged. Thomas, Kira, and David, the 3 she'd actually met, did have genuine bonds with her. But they were weak, barely formed. Nothing that could override their existing pack allegiances or personal autonomy. More like friendship, connection. The kind that happened naturally between people who understood each other. The other 4 had no bond with Isla at all. These are fabricated, Master Aldrich announced. Someone's used mark manipulation on them, made them believe they feel connections they don't actually have. But it's not her work. He looked at Isla. Your mark creates bonds through empathy and genuine understanding. These are crude forgeries. Whoever did this was trying to frame you, but they don't understand how eclipse marks actually function. Relief flooded through Isla so intensely she nearly collapsed. I'm not causing the pack destabilization. No. But someone is using your presence as cover for it. Master Aldrich turned to the council. You have a different problem. Someone with significant mark manipulation abilities is operating in your territory, deliberately causing chaos and ensuring the blame falls on this girl. And they're good enough at it that even council members couldn't tell the difference. Who? Garrett demanded. That, Master Aldrich said dryly, is your job to figure out. I just examine marks. I don't solve your political problems. Before anyone could respond, an explosion rocked the building. Not close somewhere in the distance, but powerful enough to shake the floors and send several council members stumbling. Alarms began blaring immediately. Silas burst through the door, his expression grim. Multiple attacks across the city, coordinated strikes on pack houses, communication centers, and transportation hubs. Whoever's behind this, they're making their move now. Damon was already moving. Get everyone to secure locations. Full lockdown protocol. Silas, coordinate with. No. Isla's voice cut through the chaos. This is about me. They're attacking now because I just got cleared by Master Aldrich. Because their plan to turn the council against me failed. All the more reason to lock you away somewhere safe, Garrett argued. Or, Isla said slowly, pieces clicking into place. All the more reason to give them what they want. Me? Absolutely not, Damon said flatly. Think about it. Isla moved to the window, looking out at smoke rising from 3 different points in the city. They've been trying to isolate me, turn me against you, make me doubt myself. The phone call last night was an offer. Work with them instead of you. They're expecting me to run, to realize I'm not safe here, to choose their protection over yours. So we do the opposite of what they expect, Damon said, understanding dawning. We show them you're not running, that you're stronger than they anticipated, and we use their assumptions against them, Rivera added. They think you're vulnerable, easy to manipulate. We make them think they've succeeded. Isla contacts them, agrees to meet, and we trace the connection back to whoever's orchestrating this. Using her as bait, Garrett said. I hate to admit it, but it's sound strategy. It's also incredibly dangerous, Damon said, his eyes locked on Isla. If anything goes wrong, then you'll be there. Isla met his gaze. I trust you, Damon. I trust that you won't let them take me, and I trust that whatever this is between us, bond or connection, or something else, it's real enough to get us through this. She saw the moment he made his decision. Saw him choose to trust her agency over his instinct to protect, to respect her strength even though it terrified him. Okay, he said quietly, but we do this my way. Full surveillance, extraction team ready to move, and at the first sign of serious danger, we pull you out. Agreed? Agreed. Master Aldrich cleared his throat. For what it's worth, I think you'll survive this. Eclipse marks don't appear on people who break easily. They appear on bridges, people strong enough to connect things that are meant to be separate. And bridges, young one, are built to withstand storms. An hour later, Isla stood in a different room, this one designed for surveillance and communication with Silas, fitting her with a nearly invisible earpiece and a tracking device so small it looked like a freckle on her collarbone. Remember, Silas said quietly, your job is to make contact and gather information, nothing else. Don't try to be a hero. Don't confront whoever shows up. Just get enough data for us to identify them, and we handle the rest. I understand. I understand. I'm not sure you do. Silas met her eyes. Damon is in love with you. If something happens to you, if I have to tell him we lost you, that will break him in ways I don't know how to fix. So, please, for his sake if not your own, be careful. The words settled heavy in her chest. Damon hadn't said it, hadn't admitted to love, but hearing it confirmed by someone who'd known him for years, who'd watched him maintain emotional distance from everyone, who understood what it meant for him to let someone close. I'll be careful, Isla promised. She pulled out her phone and dialed the number from last night. It rang once, twice, 3 times before connecting. Isla. That smooth voice answered. I was hoping you'd reconsider my offer. I want to meet, she said, pitching her voice to sound uncertain, afraid. Not hard when she actually was both those things. But I need to know who you are. What you really want from me. All in good time. There's an abandoned warehouse on the north edge of the city, used to be a textile factory. Come alone. Tonight, midnight. And Isla? He paused. I know the Northern King will want to follow you. Tell him that if I detect any surveillance, any backup, any hint that you're not coming alone, the attacks on his city will continue until there's nothing left to protect. The line went dead. Isla looked up at Damon, who'd been listening through the room's speakers. His expression was carved from stone, but his eyes showed something raw and painful. He'll know if you follow me, she said unnecessarily. Then I'll have to be very good at not being detected. Damon moved closer, taking her hands. Isla, we don't have to do this. There are other ways. Name one that doesn't end with more people getting hurt. He couldn't. They both knew he couldn't. I hate this, he said quietly. I hate sending you into danger. I hate that you're brave enough to do it. I hate that I can't just lock you away and keep you safe. I know. Isla squeezed his hands. But this is who I am now. Not the invisible girl from the coffee shop, not the victim who lets other people make her choices. I'm the bridge, remember? And bridges don't hide. Damon pulled her against him, holding her with an intensity that spoke of fear and need and something deeper than either. When this is over, he murmured into her hair. When you're safe, and whoever's behind this is dealt with, we're going to have a very long conversation about what you mean to me. About what I should have said weeks ago. Deal? Deal, she whispered. They stood like that for a long moment, drawing strength from each other, preparing for a night that could end in triumph or tragedy. And somewhere in the city, in an abandoned warehouse that smelled like old fabric and broken dreams, someone waited for the eclipse mark to arrive. Waited for the moment when they could finally claim the power they'd been seeking. waited for Isla to make the choice that would determine everything. The game was reaching its endgame. And soon, very soon, everyone would learn what an eclipse mark truly meant. Bridge or weapon? Salvation or destruction? The answer was about to be written in blood and bond, and the terrible courage of a girl who'd spent her whole life being told she was nothing and who'd finally learned to believe she was everything. Chapter 9. The Warehouse. Midnight arrived cold and merciless. Isla stood outside the abandoned textile factory, her breath forming clouds in the November air, her heart hammering so hard she could feel it in her throat. The building loomed before her 4 stories of broken windows and rusted fire escapes, graffiti covering every surface like desperate prayers to gods who'd long since abandoned this place. Behind her, somewhere in the darkness, Damon and his team waited. She couldn't see them, couldn't sense them, but she trusted they were there, trusted that if things went wrong, they'd move fast enough to save her. The trust felt like its own kind of power. She pushed open the door. It wasn't locked, wasn't even closed properly, and stepped into darkness broken only by moonlight streaming through shattered skylights. The space was massive, full of ancient machinery that cast strange shadows, conveyor belts frozen mid-motion like time had stopped decades ago and never started again. "Hello?" Her voice echoed off concrete walls. "I'm here. Alone, like you asked." For a long moment, nothing. Just the sound of wind whistling through broken windows and her own breathing too loud in her ears. Then, "Not quite alone though, are you?" The voice came from above. Isla looked up to see a figure standing on the second-floor catwalk, silhouetted against moonlight. Male, tall, with an authority in his stance that reminded her uncomfortably of Damon. "I came by myself," Isla said, keeping her voice steady. "Your attacks stopped. That was the deal. The attacks stopped because I wanted you to come. But I'm not stupid, Isla." He started descending the metal stairs, his footsteps ringing out like a countdown. "King Damon is somewhere nearby, probably with a dozen guards and extraction protocols. You might have come through that door alone. But you're not really alone. You've never learned to be alone." He reached the ground floor, and moonlight finally revealed his face. Isla's breath caught. She knew him, not personally, but she'd seen him in the council chamber, standing behind High Alpha Garrett. One of the witnesses, one of the reinforcements, someone who'd watched her entire assessment with Master Aldrich. "You were there," she said. "You heard everything. Heard that I was cleared. That someone was framing me. And you attacked anyway. Because being cleared doesn't change what you are." He moved closer, and Isla could see his mark now visible on his neck, spreading down toward his chest. Complex patterns, but with something wrong about them. Distorted, like someone had tried to draw a symphony and gotten static instead. "You're an eclipse mark, Isla. Do you have any idea how rare that is? How valuable?" "I'm not a commodity. Everything is a commodity in the right market." He circled her slowly, predatory. "I've been watching you for months, since before your mark even appeared. Did you know that? I was in the coffee shop that day, sitting in the corner, watching you make lattes and hate yourself, watching you hide behind high collars and apologetic smiles. And I thought, what a waste. All that potential, all that power waiting to emerge, trapped in someone who'd been taught to be small." Ice spread through Isla's veins. "You knew my mark was coming?" "I knew something was coming. Eclipse marks announce themselves before they appear, distortions in existing bonds, people feeling connections they can't explain. Reality becoming just slightly flexible." His smile was cruel. "You were a beacon calling out to anyone who knew what to listen for. And when your mark finally appeared, when everyone told you it meant nothing, I knew they were wrong. I knew you were exactly what I'd been waiting for." "What do you want from me?" "I want you to choose me instead of him." He stopped in front of her, close enough that she could see the fanaticism in his eyes. "Damon Ashford keeps you small, keeps you questioning yourself, doubting your power, playing by rules designed to limit what you can become. But I see your potential. I see what you could be if you stopped apologizing for existing. You're the one who called me," Isla realized, "last night, and you're the one who manipulated those 4 people, made them believe they had bonds with me. Guilty. He didn't sound remotely apologetic. I needed the council to see you as a threat. Needed them to push you, to make you desperate enough to consider alternatives. But then that fool Aldrich showed up and cleared you, and I had to adjust the plan. The attacks on the city. You killed people. Sacrifices for a greater purpose. He reached out to touch her face, and Isla forced herself not to flinch away. Don't look at me like I'm a monster, Isla. Everything I've done to free you. To show you that Damon's protection is just another cage. With me, you could learn what your mark really does. We could form bonds across territories, unite packs that have been at war for generations, create an empire built on connection instead of conquest. Or, Isla said quietly, you could use my mark to control people. Force bonds they don't want. Turn me into exactly what everyone fears, a weapon. His expression hardened. If that's how you see it, then you're still thinking like a victim. Still letting other people define your power instead of claiming it for yourself. No. Isla stepped back, putting distance between them. I'm thinking like someone who understands that power without conscience is just cruelty with better branding. You don't want to free me, you want to use me. There's a difference. Then you're choosing him. The words came out flat, disappointed. Choosing the king who treats you like fragile glass over the person who sees your true potential. I'm choosing myself, Isla corrected. I'm choosing to be someone who uses power to connect, rather than control. To build bridges, instead of weapons. And I'm choosing to trust that the people who love me will respect that choice. Instead of trying to manipulate me into becoming something I'm not. She felt it then, the bond with Damon, warm and solid even across the distance. Felt him responding to her words. Felt his presence like an anchor point in darkness. The man's face twisted with rage. Then you're a fool, and if I can't have your cooperation, I'll take your power by force. He moved fast, faster than she expected, grabbing her arm with bruising strength, and the moment his skin touched hers, she felt it. His mark wasn't natural, wasn't formed through normal manifestation. Someone had altered it, twisted it, turned it into something that could manipulate bonds the way a lockpick manipulates tumblers, and he was trying to use it on her now, trying to force a connection that would give him access to her mark's abilities. But he'd miscalculated, because Isla had spent 3 weeks learning about her mark, learning that connection required consent, that bonds couldn't be forced, that the very thing that made eclipse marks powerful was their foundation in genuine understanding. And there was nothing genuine about this. No, Isla said, and pushed back. Not physically. Not with strength or violence, but with intention. With the same skill she'd used to connect with Thomas and Kira and David. Except inverted. Instead of opening herself to him, she closed. Instead of forming a bond, she rejected it. Her mark blazed hot between her shoulder blades, not painful, but powerful. Real. The man screamed and stumbled backward, clutching his arm where he'd touched her. What did you do? I said no. Isla's voice was steady now, certain. You don't get to force bonds with me. You don't get to access my power without permission. And you definitely don't get to use me as a weapon. You little... He lunged for her again, but this time he never made contact. Damon appeared out of darkness like an avenging shadow, intercepting the attack with brutal efficiency. They went down in a tangle of limbs, Damon's hands finding the man's throat, his voice a growl Isla had never heard before. You touched her, hurt her, tried to take something she didn't offer. Each word was punctuated with controlled violence. Give me one reason I shouldn't kill you right here. Damon, don't. Isla moved closer, even though every instinct screamed to stay away from the violence. He's not worth it. He's not worth the haunted dreams. Damon looked up at her, and she saw the war in his eyes, the king who'd learned to make impossible choices, and the man who'd let himself care about someone enough that her pain became unbearable. He tried to force a bond with you, Damon said, his voice rough. He would have turned you into a weapon, but he failed. Isla crouched beside them, her hand finding Damon's shoulder. Because I'm stronger than he thought, because you taught me to trust my own power, because we did this together. Slowly, reluctantly, Damon released his grip. The man gasped for air, clutching his throat, his earlier confidence shattered into fear. Silas and 3 guards emerged from the shadows, efficient and silent. We got everything on recording, Silas said. His confession, the attempted assault, all of it. More than enough to bring charges and trace his connections. There are others, the man gasped out, still defiant even in defeat. You think I'm working alone? Eclipse marks are too valuable. There are dozens of people who want what she can do, and they won't stop just because you caught one of them. Then we'll deal with them, Damon said flatly, one at a time. For as long as it takes. He stood and pulled Isla to her feet, his hands gentle despite the violence they'd just inflicted. Are you hurt? Did he? I'm fine. And miraculously, she was. Scared, shaking slightly, but whole, unbroken. He tried to force a bond, but I stopped him, pushed back. Rivera appeared in the doorway, breathing hard like she'd been running. You rejected a forced bond? Isla, that's extraordinary. Most people can't resist mark manipulation, especially from someone as skilled as… She stopped, seeing the man on the ground. Wait. Is that Vaughn? You know him? Isla asked. He used to be a mark specialist, before he got caught experimenting with bond manipulation. We thought he'd been exiled. Rivera's expression darkened. He's been doing this for years, altering people's marks, creating artificial bonds, selling his services to anyone who wants to control pack dynamics. If he's been targeting you specifically, then we need to find out who hired him. Damon finished. He looked at Vaughn. Start talking. Who wanted Isla? Who's paying you to destabilize my territory? Vaughn smiled through bloodied teeth. You think I'm going to tell you? You think any punishment you dish out is worse than what they'll do if I talk? He laughed, the sound broken and desperate. You have no idea what you're dealing with, King. No idea how many people want an eclipse mark under their control, and they won't stop. Ever. Then I guess I'll just have to be ready for them. Isla said quietly. All eyes turned to her. Because I'm not running. I'm not hiding. And I'm definitely not letting anyone turn me into a weapon. If there are people out there who want to control me, they're going to learn the same lesson Vaughn just did. I'm not something that can be controlled. Damon's expression showed something between pride and terror. Isla, I know it's dangerous. I know I'm going to spend the rest of my life being a target. But that's better than spending it being invisible. Better than hiding what I am to make other people comfortable. She looked at him directly. You said we'd have a conversation when this was over. About what I mean to you. Well, it's over. So, talk. Around them, Silas and the guards were efficiently restraining Vaughn. Rivera was already on her phone coordinating with Master Aldrich, and the warehouse was filling with people. But Damon's attention remained locked on Isla like nothing else existed. You want to do this here? He asked. Now? I want to do this while I still have the courage, Isla admitted. Before I start overthinking it, before doubt creeps back in. Damon took her hands, and the bond between them flared warm and solid. Okay. The truth. The whole truth. He took a breath. I love you. Not because of the bond, not because of your mark, not because of what you represent or what you can do. I love you because you're brave enough to face down monsters even when you're terrified, because you question your own power instead of abusing it, because you write stories in notebooks and make terrible coffee and survived a lifetime of being told you were worthless without letting it destroy who you are. Isla's breath caught. I love you, Damon continued, because when I'm with you, I'm not just a king making impossible decisions. I'm a person, a man who's allowed to care about something more than duty and responsibility. You gave me that gift without even knowing it, and I know we have work ahead of us. 6 months isn't up. The council will still have questions. There are apparently multiple people trying to capture you, but none of that changes how I feel. Damon, Isla whispered, tears streaming down her face. I don't know if what I feel is the bond or real or… It's both, he said gently. The bond opened the door. But what we've built over the past 3 weeks, the conversations, the trust, the way we've learned each other, that's real. That's us, and it's strong enough to survive whatever comes next. Isla reached up and cupped his face, feeling the scratch of stubble, the warmth of his skin, the realness of him. I love you too, even though it terrifies me, even though I don't know what it means or where it goes. I love you." He kissed her then, not gently, not carefully, but with the intensity of someone who'd been holding back for weeks. And Isla kissed him back, pouring everything she couldn't say into the contact. Relief, and fear, and hope, and certainty all tangled together. When they finally pulled apart, Silas was clearing his throat loudly. "Not to interrupt, but we should probably leave before someone notices the small army we brought to a warehouse in the middle of the night." Damon laughed, actually laughed, and Isla felt the sound settle into her chest like warmth. "Right. Yes, let's go home. Home." The word felt significant. Not his palace or her apartment, but home. The place they were building together, one conversation and connection at a time. They walked out of the warehouse together, leaving Vaughn and his threats behind, stepping into cold November air that felt like freedom. And high above, in a penthouse apartment on the other side of the city, someone watched through binoculars as King Damon and his eclipse mark left the warehouse. Watched and smiled, because Vaughn had been sloppy, overconfident, too eager to claim power for himself. But he'd also been useful. He'd demonstrated what an eclipse mark could do, had proven that Isla's abilities were even more valuable than anticipated, and more importantly, he'd failed, which meant the real players could now make their move. The ones who understood patience, who knew how to manipulate not through force, but through careful cultivation of need and desire. The ones who knew that the best way to control someone powerful wasn't to cage them, it was to make them want to be caged. "Soon," the watcher murmured, lowering the binoculars, "soon you'll understand that love is just another form of leverage, little Eclipse. And when you do, you'll come to us willingly." The game wasn't over. It was only beginning. Epilogue. 6 months later, spring arrived with the kind of warmth that made winter feel like a distant memory. Isla stood in what had become her favorite room in the palace, the library that Damon had renovated specifically for her. Floor-to-ceiling windows let in afternoon sunlight, comfortable chairs invited hours of reading, and shelves overflowed with books she'd chosen herself, fantasy mostly, but also history and mark theory, and notebooks full of her own stories. She was writing when Damon found her, her hand moving across the page with confidence that would have shocked the girl from 6 months ago. "The council meeting starts in an hour," he said from the doorway. "Final assessment. They'll want a report on your progress." Isla set down her pen. "I know. I'm ready." And she was, ready to face Chancellor Thorne and High Alpha Garrett, and all the others who'd spent 6 months watching her every move, documenting every bond she formed, waiting for evidence that she was the threat they feared. They wouldn't find it. Because over 6 months, Isla had learned exactly what her eclipse mark meant. Not a weapon, not a miracle, just a different way of connecting with people, of understanding their pain and joy and everything in between. She'd formed bonds with dozens of people, pack members and humans, alphas and subordinates, people from territories that had been enemies for generations, and every single bond had been chosen. Conscious, real. "Rivera says your control is extraordinary," Damon said, moving to stand beside her chair. "She's never seen anyone develop mark abilities so quickly. I had good teachers." Isla looked up at him, at the man who'd chosen her over political convenience, who'd stood beside her through threats and doubt and the constant pressure of being watched. And good motivation. 6 months of falling asleep beside him and waking up to his smile. 6 months of learning how to balance power with responsibility, how to trust herself without becoming arrogant, how to love someone without losing herself in them. 6 months of becoming someone she'd never imagined she could be. "There's something else," Damon said, and his tone made her pay attention. "We caught 3 more people trying to get close to you. One posed as a new palace cook, another as a mark researcher, the third as a journalist doing a feature on eclipse marks. All of them had connections to underground mark manipulation networks." Isla's stomach tightened. Vaughn had been right. They hadn't stopped. Probably never would. "How many more will there be?" she asked quietly. "I don't know." Damon crouched beside her chair, taking her hand. "Maybe dozens. Maybe hundreds. There are a lot of people in this world who see power as something to be controlled rather than respected. But Isla, we're getting better at identifying them. Better at protecting you without making you feel caged. And you're getting stronger. Sometimes I wonder if it's worth it, she admitted. If I should just disappear. Hide the mark again. Stop being a target. Do you really think that? Damon's eyes searched hers. Or is that just fear talking? Isla thought about it honestly. Thought about the bonds she'd formed Thomas, who'd found the courage to leave his pack and find one that valued him for more than his numbers. Kira, who'd learned that loyalty and independent thought weren't mutually exclusive. David, who'd found a way to honor his lost mate while still living fully in the present. And dozens more, people whose lives had been changed, not because she'd manipulated them, but because she'd witnessed them. No, she said finally. I don't really think that. I just get scared sometimes. Scared that one day someone will get through your security, or that I'll make a mistake and hurt someone, or that you'll become what they fear. Damon finished. I know. But Isla, the fact that you're still scared of that? That's proof it won't happen. The moment you stop questioning yourself, stop worrying about the impact of your power, that's when you become dangerous. As long as you're asking these questions, you're safe. We're safe, Isla corrected. Because I'm not doing this alone anymore. He smiled and kissed her gently. Never alone. That's the deal, remember? An hour later, they walked into the council chamber together. The same room where Isla had been assessed 6 months ago, where she'd been called a weapon and a threat and dangerous. All 7 council members were present. But this time, when Isla entered, several of them stood. Not in deference exactly, but in acknowledgement. Recognition. Chancellor Thorne spoke first. Isla Thorne. We've spent 6 months observing your mark's development, documenting your bonds, and assessing your control. The Council has reviewed all evidence and is prepared to render our final determination regarding your status. Isla's hand found Damon's, squeezing tightly. After extensive deliberation, Thorne continued. This Council rules that Isla Thorne is not a threat to territorial stability. Her eclipse mark, while powerful, has been demonstrated to function through consent and genuine connection rather than force or manipulation. She has formed 17 documented bonds, none of which have shown evidence of coercion or undue influence. She has submitted to regular assessments and demonstrated consistent control over her abilities. Relief flooded through Isla so intensely she felt dizzy. Furthermore, Ambassador Chen added, we acknowledge that Isla's presence has actually increased stability in several contested territories. Pack bonds that were fraying have been reinforced through her intervention. Conflicts that might have escalated into violence were resolved through her ability to facilitate genuine understanding between parties. Her mark appears to function as intended as a bridge, not a weapon. Therefore, Thorne concluded, this council removes all restrictions on Isla's autonomy. She is free to live without surveillance, to form bonds as she sees fit, and to use her abilities according to her own judgment. King Damon's protective custody is formally dissolved, though of course any personal arrangements between them are their own business. A slight smile crossed her severe features. Congratulations, Isla. You've proven us wrong. That's not easy to do. High Alpha Garrett stood, and Isla tensed. But his expression, while still stern, held something like grudging respect. I still think eclipse marks are dangerous. I think you're powerful in ways we don't fully understand. But I also think... He paused, seeming to struggle with the words. I think maybe dangerous isn't the same as wrong. Maybe we need people like you, people who force us to question our assumptions and bridge our divisions. So, good luck. I suspect you'll need it. Coming from Garrett, it was practically a declaration of alliance. The council members filed out, leaving Isla and Damon alone in the chamber. For a moment, neither of them moved, then Isla started laughing slightly. Hysterical laughter that came from release and relief and disbelief. I'm free, she said. Actually free. No surveillance, no restrictions, no... Damon pulled her into his arms and kissed her, and the laughter dissolved into something warmer, deeper. When they finally pulled apart, he was smiling in a way that made her heart skip. There's something I want to show you, he said. He led her through corridors she'd walked 100 times, but this time they turned down a hallway she'd never noticed. At the end was a door marked with a symbol she recognized, her eclipse mark, rendered in gold. "What is this?" she asked. "Open it." She did, and gasped. The room beyond was beautiful, smaller than the library but just as carefully designed. Walls painted in soft colors, shelves ready for books and memories, a desk by the window with perfect natural light, and on the far wall, a photograph, the two of them, taken during one of their late-night conversations, both laughing at something long forgotten. "This is yours," Damon said quietly. "Your space in the palace. Not a guest room, not temporary quarters. Yours. If you want it." Isla turned to face him, understanding dawning. "You're asking me to stay, officially. I'm asking you to build a life here, with me. Not as my subject or my responsibility, but as..." He seemed to struggle with the word, then found it. "As my partner, my equal, the person I want beside me for whatever comes next. Are you proposing?" Isla asked, her voice barely above a whisper. "Not yet." Damon smiled. "You've only been free for 5 minutes. Seems wrong to trap you into something immediately. But eventually? Yes. When you're ready. When we've had time to figure out what forever means." He took her hand. "For now, I'm just asking if you want to stay. If this life we're building is something you want to choose." Isla looked around the room that had been made for her, thought about the past 6 months, the fear and growth and love and becoming, thought about who she'd been when she walked into that coffee shop with a null mark, and who she was now standing in a palace with an eclipse mark and a king who loved her, thought about all the stories she'd imagined as a child, and how none of them had been as complicated or beautiful or real as this one. "Yes," she said simply. "I choose this. I choose you. I choose us." And somewhere in the city, in apartments and pack houses and quiet corners where people gathered, 17 bonds flared with warmth. 17 people who'd been touched by an eclipse mark felt a moment of connection, of recognition, of being witnessed, because that's what eclipse marks did. They reminded people they weren't alone, that their pain and joy and struggle mattered, that bridges could be built between things that seemed permanently separate, that love, real love, complicated love, love that required courage and trust and constant choice, was the most powerful force in any world. Isla Thorne was no longer invisible. She was a bridge, a catalyst, a story still being written, and this was only the beginning, the end. But in a penthouse across the city, plans continued. Patience was rewarded, and soon the real test would begin.